Notre Dame fans, welcome to a little bit of a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Instead of trying to pick a topic today, we thought, there's a lot of different things going on. So we will kind of discuss a few things and then have a midweek mailbag, which we tend to do from time to time. And then, of course, a little bit before the show, there's an announcement that Notre Dame has landed a grad transfer, which we will get into also. So we had to kind of deal with that a little bit. Ryan's working on getting some stuff ready on that. And I've been watching film. So one of the many, many reasons I absolutely love this new staff, because I can say, hey, you work on the story, let me work on the film, although I think Ryan would have rather gone it the other way around. But so Notre Dame has picked up a grad transfer, and his name is Chris Smith, correct, Ryan? He is from Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
He is a graduate transfer. He was part of he was a starter for them last year, had five tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks in 10 games, because the Ivy League plays 10 games unless you make the postseason. Interesting player, Ryan. He's from Detroit, which I like. I like that he's a Midwestern kid. I like that he's from Detroit. Went to Cranbrook, which, that's a private school. His real name's not Clarence, it's Chris. So he is I got a chance to watch a little bit of the film. And the thing I said to you, Ryan, was, he reminds me of Jacob Lacey, right? Like he's listed at 293. He's a bigger kid, like on paper, but you look at him, he's not a real big kid. He was listed at like 260 up until this past year, and he was listed at 293. So he's not a big, they would try to use him in sort of two gap at Harvard, and he wasn't great at it. When they would let him penetrate and kind of get up the field, that's where I thought he was at his best. So some things that he'll need to work on, but he'll get great coaching, obviously, at Notre Dame. But look, he gives you depth, right? And that was when Aiden Kaneana went down. I don't think the staff is super confident that Gabriel Rubio is ready now. He may get ready. You've got Howard Cross, you've got Jacob Lacey, and I think another thing too is with the desire to have Riley Mills as an outside guy, which I think is ultimately where look, we had an intel piece on the site last night, Ryan, and one of the things that I keep hearing is that one of the standouts from the spring, and I've heard this from multiple sources, has been Riley Mills. But it's when I'm like, okay, well, when's he making plays? And it's always when I'm in conversation, it's always when he's as a big end. He just makes more plays as a big end. It's not a coincidence that the best game of his career happened when he was playing big end last year against Virginia. So I think they've got to find a way to make that work. And if you're able to get, if Chris Smith is able to come to Notre Dame and earn a rotation spot, if Gabriel Rubio can emerge, then maybe you have enough depth inside to keep him outside once Jason Adamiola comes back. And so, I think that's kind of where a young man like this makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. As long as, and this is my stance always, Ryan, as long as he's going to have to earn his keep just like everybody else does. That hasn't always been the case with transfers at Notre Dame, as we saw last year. But if he has to earn his keep and then he earns it and he can give you 10, 12 snaps a game, 10, 15, 20 snaps a game, great. And, so there's no harm in this, right? As long as he's got to earn his keep, Ryan, this is a transfer that makes a lot of sense to me. What say you?
Yeah, no, I think it makes a ton of sense. Like you said, I mean, you're getting a player that's very experienced. Like you said, I mean, he just came off of a first team all Ivy season. So he was a good player for Harvard. Obviously it's a step up, but I mean, if you're getting a player that was an all league player at his level and he's coming in just to compete as a depth piece, I'm completely fine with it, man. Like I'm completely fine. And I believe, Brian, I could be wrong about this, but he was listed as a junior on the roster, so I think he also has multiple years of eligibility potentially.
So he was at Harvard according to the I thought I muted myself for a minute. Let me find this again. According to the roster for Harvard, this was his fourth year. So I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to find that out, right? So and he missed 2020, right?
Right. Yeah, the 2020 season. What I was going to say there is the fact that obviously he had the season canceled. The Ivy League was canceled due to COVID, so he was a third year player.
So I don't know, weird. According to this, his bio at Harvard, right? He was part of the 2008. His first year at Harvard was 2018.
Yeah.
And he played in 9 games. I mean, this is a kid that's been in the rotation for Harvard from the minute he stepped foot on campus. 9 games for Harvard is basically a full season. Played in all 10 games in 2019. 2020 was canceled, and he played in every game this year. So this is a kid that's played a lot of football at Harvard. And so to your point, Ryan, I don't think this is a one and done situation, because I mean he could actually, in my if I'm correct here, this will be his 5th year, and he'll have a 6th year because he never redshirted, right? And so now he doesn't get like an extra year because of the COVID year, because it's like with Jack Cohn, your COVID year and your redshirt year for a medical or any other can't be the same year, right? You can't get 2 years out of one. So this would have been upcoming for him, his 5th year, right? But I think he'll have a chance to have another. I'm gonna have to look into that. I'm not 100% sure on that, because as soon as I start talking about that stuff, it starts getting a little bit screwy, right? But this should be his 4th year. This may be his last year. Again, I got to look into that. The whole COVID redshirt thing just really jacks me up. There's a chance he may have 2 years, but I think right now you're looking at this being a 1-year thing for now, right? And seeing how it goes. So I don't think, with the numbers that Notre Dame is talking about on the D line in the 2023 class, and the fact that they're trying to find an extra scholarship to try to bring in a 5th guy, I don't think they would take that away with this, is kind of where I look at it. But it's an interesting situation, Ryan. So I like it. Look, and you're gonna pop into film. I know what Ryan's gonna do. As soon as this show's over, he's gonna go pick up his daughter, bring her home, do what he's got to do as a dad. And as soon as she's either chilling or sleeping, Ryan's gonna be popping on the film of Chris Smith from Harvard. So I can't wait to see that. So, but it's good, solid pickup. Solid pickup. It's kind of like how I felt about Kane Madden last year, Ryan. Like, look, as long as this kid has to earn his keep, it makes sense, right? The problem with Kane Madden was he was kind of handed a job, and it was never a competition. I don't see that being the case with this. I don't see Al Washington. I don't see Al Golden. Nothing about what Marcus Freeman has preached from the moment he took over as head coach about competition would lead me to believe that this kid's going to be handed a job. But I think as long as it's done the right way, I assume it will be, I think this makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, because you're getting he went to Harvard. I mean,
so he's smart, probably.
He's going to handle the academic workload at Notre Dame, right? You're getting a kid to get graduate transfers. Normally there's some background check stuff, so this is a kid that doesn't have issues in his background as far as getting in trouble. So I would imagine he brings some maturity, some leadership, things along those lines. Mm-hmm. So I see no downside to making this move.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is I don't think there's much risk to this, right? Like if Notre Dame treats this the way that we think they are treating it, and it's the fact of like, hey, Aiden Keanayana was injured during the spring. You have one less body for the entire season. You have some and you've talked about it, Brian, with a little bit of the intel stuff. It's like, the interior defensive line, it's a little sporadic right now. It's a little bit up and down. There's some guys that they're excited about. Like, I know Howard Cross is having a nice spring, and there's other guys that they're excited about the potential, but you still need some reassurance inside. Right. And adding a player like this, again, the expectations are not that he's going to come and start, but Chris Smith has played a lot of football. So I don't think that he's going to come into a practice and he's going to look out of place. I think he's going to be able to at least compete and give them some depth. Absolutely.
There's a little bit of other news yesterday, Ryan, that broke, and that is that Notre Dame is going to play Tennessee State in 2023. It's going to be the second game of the year. It's going to be September 2nd, and boy, I was a little upset with Notre Dame, if for no other reason than did you have to drop that on my anniversary, because like I'm sitting there trying to just relax my wife, and then I got to deal with this stuff all night, right? And I have a lot to say about this, Ryan, and I feel like the problem is like people have kind of entrenched themselves on two sides, and there's no conversation being able to happen right now, which is really frustrating me. And you see it on Twitter, which you expect on Twitter, because most people on Twitter don't know how to have grown-up conversations, right? And then you have on the board, there's been better conversation on the board, but still it's like people are just not trying to hear the other side's point of view. Here's my stance on this. Number one, I understand why this game is being played, right? A lot of people are like, well, no, you don't understand. No, I understand. I don't have to, because I don't agree with something doesn't mean I don't understand it. That's silly. I understand it, right? There's a lot of reasons for it. You're trying to, it's kind of like the move with Howard, right? Like Notre Dame. And if you understand Notre Dame's history, going all the way back to the Newt Rockne era when they were battling the KKK with the involvement from Father Hesburgh and Notre Dame during the civil rights movement, there's a lot of things to say, yeah, it would make sense that in an era where there's an emphasis on trying to promote the historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, that Notre Dame would be one of the big schools that's going to kind of not only just play them, because the Power 5 schools play HBCU schools, but to make it in a way where Notre Dame is going to promote the game and not treat it as just like an FCS cakewalk that we're using to pad our schedule to get guys reps. Right? They're having a press conference today and all that kind of stuff. Eddie George and Marcus Freeman are both Ohio State alums. It's one alum trying to help up another alum and build up his program. Because let me tell you something, for Tennessee State, going on the road and being like, hey, look, we're playing Notre Dame is going to be a great recruiting tool. It is. And so there's a lot. I understand. And then, of course, Tennessee State being the reason why also is, of all the HBCUs that play football, I believe Tennessee State's the closest. It's in Nashville. Nashville's, 5.5, 6 hours away from South Bend. Right? It's to get to DC where Howard and Morgan State and all those are, it's a longer trip. So I believe this is also the closest. So all the things make sense. And my opinion is, if you're going to play an FCS school, I'd rather it be a situation like this than Indiana State or Illinois State, where it's just a throwaway game, right? At least this way it can be spun in a way where there's more meaning behind it, right? And the reality is if you don't think that there's going to be recruiting benefits for Notre Dame in this, you're not thinking, like, you're not being thoughtful enough about the situation. The reality is 2 5-star recruits last year turned down offers from every school in the country, including Notre Dame, to go to an HBCU, to Jackson State, right? You're seeing guys like Deion Sanders and Eddie George be taking head coaching jobs, and they are, especially in this era of NIL, they're going to go out and they're just going to get more of these kids. So for Notre Dame, say we can either pretend it's not happening, or we can embrace it, and embrace it in a way to where you're going to be able to kind of say, look, we're doing our part to help, and it's going to be noticed. Look, I'm telling you, the conversations I've had in the last 24 hours, less than that, since this broke, Ryan, it's being received extremely well by the people that Notre Dame wanted it to be received well by. It is. It's not being received well by the people that Notre Dame doesn't care if it's received well by, and that's the majority of their fans. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Because the flip side of this, and the reason why ultimately, so I understand all of it, Ryan, but I still don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is twofold. It has nothing to do with Tennessee State. It has nothing to do with any other FCS program. It's that right there. It's the FCS part, right? And one of the points of pride that Notre Dame fans have been able to hold on to, and there aren't many left, is that they've never played an FCS school. And that's gone. That's gone now, right? Like, and I had a friend say, look, it's just a one-time thing. Yeah, it's a one-time thing probably. Or they may do these every now and then. It's not going to be a regular thing, I don't think. But no matter if it's a one-time thing or not, that's gone. You can't say we've never played an FCS school. The number two thing is, practically speaking, unless they're able to schedule a road game against Hawaii, and I'm looking at Notre Dame's schedule right now, Ryan, and they have a game in Ireland. They have road games against Clemson, Stanford, Duke, Louisville, NC State. The odds of Notre Dame scheduling a 7th game away from home is slim to none. This isn't a move to, like, let's do this and then play Hawaii. Plus, playing Hawaii doesn't really do a whole lot for you on top of this. So to me, what this is about is where I really dislike this is Notre Dame has always been able to say it takes you to play your conference championship game to get to the number of FBS games we've played. And they can't say that anymore. Like, they're going to play fewer FBS games than just about any team in the country that's competing for a playoff spot, right? Which are usually conference champions. So now, if Notre Dame is 11-1, they're going to have 10 wins over FBS teams at best, right? And that's just not going to carry the same cachet. And so now you've almost guaranteed that you need to be undefeated. And some people say, well, they already needed to be undefeated. Nonsense, because the last time Notre Dame made the college football playoff, they were a one-loss team. In 2017, Notre Dame was all the way up to number 3 with a loss in the college football playoff. If you go back to 2015, Notre Dame was in the top 4 with a loss in the college football playoff. And so, in my opinion, this is a situation where you have now almost guaranteed yourself the need to go undefeated, because even if you look at the schedule and it's not a super sexy schedule top to bottom, it's super top heavy. It's Ohio State, USC, and Clemson on the road. The problem is you don't know how good USC and Clemson are going to be. There's this assumption that USC by 2023 is going to be a great team, and maybe they will be, but we don't know that. And same thing with Clemson. Like right now, Clemson's trending downward. We don't know how good Clemson is going to be next year. So, to me, this just doesn't help Notre Dame at all. And at the end of the day, sentiment and emotion and all that other stuff aside, my number one priority for Notre Dame is competing for a championship. The number one thing you owe your players and your coaches and your fans is a chance to play for a championship. And if USC, Ohio State, and Clemson are as good as everybody thinks they're going to be, then what happens is that it's going to be really hard to run the table. Because let me break it down for you. I think people kind of want to talk about, well, they got to go undefeated. Nick Saban's won 6 national championships at Alabama, right? I'm looking at his deal now. He's won 6 national championships, 7 total, right? So if you look at LSU, 5 of those 7 championships were won in a year in which he had a regular season loss. So Alabama, for all its greatness, has had 7 years where it's won or 6 years where it's won a national championship, and in 4 of those years, they made it to the playoff with a loss, because it's hard to go undefeated, and it's hard to go undefeated consistently. And when you play the kind of schedule that Notre Dame's going to play at the top, it can be challenging. And if those teams end up not being as good, and let's say Clemson's a 9-3 team again like they were this year, and USC's an 8-4 team, and only Ohio State's good, then what is your resume built on? Because after those 3, it's Navy, Central Michigan, Wake Forest, Stanford, Duke, Louisville, NC State, and Pitt. Now, if NC State and Pitt are as good as they were this year, you're fine. But what are the odds of that being the case? So there's just a lot to this, Ryan, that practically speaking, for the things that I care about, because look, the FCS thing, it's over with, right? Okay, they're going to play an FCS school. So whatever. It sucks, but there's nothing I can do about it. But the practicality of this and what the impact it could be on Notre Dame's ability to play for championship is going to last for a while. And that's going to be the talking point that I'm going to spend most of my time focusing on.
Well, that was my main takeaway when I saw it too, was that, I mean, Notre Dame always has a somewhat of a smaller margin for error comparative to some schools that have a conference championship game and have that 13th game, right? But the fact now that you have a situation where you have 12 games without a postseason championship in the conference, and now only 11 hold a great amount of weight, because there's no disrespect to an FCS program, no disrespect to Tennessee State, but that's one of the biggest pluses, I think, for Notre Dame, is the fact that, like, hey, you historically speaking, Alabama's going to have a couple easy games, right? Like, they're going to have an FCS opponent. They're going to have a lower level group of 5 opponent, and they're going to have those games that are kind of like, because, the SEC is so daunting and they need a couple of those games kind of mixed in. Notre Dame doesn't really have an off week, even their perceived easy games are like you're transitioning real quick and playing the triple option of Navy. It's not easy. You know what I mean? So I think that you just made a smaller margin of error to obviously make that step to a championship even smaller, which I get it. I understand why the move was made, but I don't think that practically speaking, it is the best for what the program needs personally.
Right. Agree. And there's some really bad arguments being made on both sides, in my opinion. The one that being made for the justification for it is, well, Bama plays FCS teams. And the reality is Notre Dame's never going to get the benefit of the doubt that Alabama does. Like, you all have to understand this, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. Sometimes we have to accept reality. And the reality is, Ryan, of this situation is that Alabama is in the SEC champ in general, or 2 best teams in the SEC are always going to get the benefit of the doubt that other conferences and teams are just not going to get, which means you can't have an equal record to that team, right? Like Corey D says, Bama has made the playoff despite not playing in the SEC title game. That happened once, right? In 6 years, that happened once, and that was in 2017. So If Notre Dame goes out and wins 4 national championships between now and that time, then they'll get the benefit of the doubt. That's why Bama gets the benefit of the doubt. They'd won 4 championships already. And then, of course, they get in 2017, win that year, and then win again in 2020. So Notre Dame's not going to get that benefit of the doubt. Notre Dame was a team that some people were pushing to not be in the playoff as an undefeated team in 2018, right? Now, that's a media thing, and the committee hasn't been that way, but the committee changes annually. So far, the committee has been favorable to Notre Dame. We may not know if that's the case moving forward. So you have to position yourself in the best way possible. And in my opinion, this doesn't do that when you already have a pretty soft schedule. I mean, Notre Dame's schedule that year, the first 3 games of the year is going to be Navy, Tennessee State, and Central Michigan. I mean, like I'm not a big proponent of playing the gauntlet they used to play, but at some point in time, it's like, come on now. Like, you're playing Louisville, you're playing Duke, you're playing Stanford, you're playing Wake Forest. Like, the home schedule, it's going to have 2 really good games on it. But other than that, it's not a real sexy home schedule. It's Pitt, it's Clemson, USC and Ohio State, then it's Central Michigan, Tennessee State, and Wake Forest. So it just, I look at it and you kind of scratch your head and say, I understand where they're coming with it, but at the same time, I can understand why they're doing it and still think it's the wrong decision. That's what I don't think people are willing to embrace. Like, no, you don't understand what this game means. Oh, I know completely what this game means. And I can understand completely why Notre Dame is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to like it. I can agree with it or understand it and I like it, but it will have positive impact. It will. There are going to be positives from this game. The reality of it is it's just the positives are not run the risk of being outweighed by the fact that it could cost you a chance to play for championship, because the 23 team I think this 22 team has a chance to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Can it be a championship team? It's still early yet for that. The 23 team is the one that everybody's kind of pointing to and saying that's the year where Notre Dame could be really good.
Yeah.
You get Ohio State at home, and now you've made it to where if your team doesn't run the table, if they don't sweep Clemson, USC, and Ohio State, which is not easy, then you're going to have a good chance of being left out.
Well, I love this conversation because I think what a healthy conversation is that you understand why someone did something and you understand both sides of the argument, but you can still have a conversation about why it's not right. And I think that this is because let's call it what it is. I saw someone in the chat say, if Notre Dame's playing their best football, it doesn't matter. And you're right. If they're 12-0 and they're a great team, it doesn't actually matter, I guess. But if they're 11-1, they have, you just mentioned they have Ohio State a couple times on the schedule. They have Clemson on it's perceivable that Notre Dame could be a really good team, a championship level team, and go 11-1. Like, it's very.
I'm going to say it again, Ryan. Nick Saban has won 6 titles at Alabama. He had a regular season loss in 4 of them. But he had the SEC title game in 3 of those 4 years. Or, he had a SEC title, SEC championship game in 3 of those 4 years to make up for that. The year he didn't have the SEC title game, they had already won 4 titles. And again, if Notre Dame goes out and wins a championship, they're going to get more 11-1 benefits of the doubt, right? But that's not the reality. Now, if Notre Dame wins a title this year and they're 11-1 and there's other 12-1 teams in 2023, Notre Dame will have a good shot at getting in. All right. I mean, so that could happen too, right? But that we don't know that that's going to be the case yet. We can only go off of what we know now. So I understand it. I think there's going to be a lot of benefits to it. Somebody said, well, this game's going to be on Peacock. There is no way in heck that Notre Dame is going to have this game on. That would be everything that you did to try to gain notoriety from this is gone if you try to put this game on Peacock. Gone. That would be stupid. And I hope that Notre Dame's not that stupid. So, it's a little. Somebody said Nick Saban has 5 titles at Alabama. No, he has 6. 9, 11, 12, 15, 17, 20. That's 6. 6. So he has 7 total. So anyway, end of the day, Ryan, this is that people are not going to change their minds. I have yet to see anyone like accept an opposing. I mean, I've seen like maybe. Let me rephrase. I want to be accurate here. I've seen a couple people be willing to like kind of like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from on that. Like, but the funny thing is, the people that have been more willing to be open minded of it are the people that were against it. Because then they're like, there's no value to Notre Dame. I'm like, well, there's some value. And then they're willing to embrace that there is some value to it, but still don't like it. I have yet to see anybody that embraces this game be open-minded enough to have an understanding of why others may not like it. Oh, it's just, you're weird and you don't get it or whatever else. It's like, no, I get it just fine. You're incapable of having a rational grown-up conversation is the problem.
Right.
And I don't know if it's virtue signaling or what it is, but look, the reality is there are two legitimate sides to this argument. And that's all I really care that people do. Engage in the legitimate sides on both sides. And at that point in time, I don't care what side you come down on, right? It's just be willing to be at least open to why this is a good idea and be open to the idea of why this isn't a good idea. And that's all I ask for people to do on the message board. And I've seen this, like my guy D-Rock said, it's a PR move. And to a degree it is, but I think it's in a PR move in the best possible sense, right? I don't think doing something that's a PR move is always a bad thing, right? I think sometimes that's a good thing, but I think it goes beyond just a PR, and I think it does fit with Notre Dame's history. I mean, you can't deny that Notre Dame doesn't have a very engaged, active role in cultural issues, especially those that have to do with race. And again, we can go back to when Knute Rockne was the head coach. I believe that's when the KKK brawl happened, right? When the Notre Dame players and students went out and fought the KKK when they came to South Bend. I believe that was during Knute Rockne. Some of the fans in here will be able to tell us if we're wrong on who the head coach was. And then you look at, again, what a lot of the stuff that Father Hesburgh was involved with during the civil rights movement. So I think this fits with who Notre Dame is in a lot of ways, Ryan. And you can't dismiss that and just chalk it up to simply just a PR move, if that makes sense.
Well, and my objection to the scheduling of it is not that it's an HBCU school. I think that's great. I love the fact that we have had now Deion Sanders and Eddie George and some notable players that have, that are going to these schools and are bringing the relevant. Well, I don't want to say relevance because it's always relevant, but bring in the.
No, you can say relevance because let's be honest, nobody's talking about Jackson State in Tennessee State if Eddie George and Deion Sanders aren't there. Mm-hmm. Can anybody in this chat tell me who Jackson State's coach was before Deion Sanders took over?
It's fair.
Or who Tennessee State's coach was before Eddie George took over? It's okay to say that but that's the whole point of why they went there, Ryan, was to say, hey, I'm trying to do something, right? I'm trying to create an opportunity for something. I'm trying to restore to glory an institution that used to be a really, like, I don't think a lot of people understand the history of the HBCUs and what they were before certain movements happened that really took a lot away from them. And there's a push to have them be restored. And that's been happening for years, really. The previous guy in charge of our country had done some things to promote that. So we can't, you were saying, Ryan, is if you're going to do this, play an FCS school, do it right.
Right.
And I think that's where a move like this says, okay, if you're going to do it, do this. Because if you're playing Indiana State or Illinois State or Youngstown State, Ryan, there is zero anything you can say to justify playing that FCS team. Nothing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely. Like if we were sitting here today and Notre Dame had scheduled, I mean, you said Illinois State is one. So like, let's use Illinois State, for instance. I would be even more harsh on this. It's not the fact that it's an HBCU. It's the fact that it's an FCS competition when you only have 12 games on the schedule.
Right.
That's the point blank period of it. It has nothing to do with what school was chosen. It has the fact to do that Notre Dame is already dealing with a smaller, larger than error than most universities in most conferences. And you just made that margin for error even smaller. That's the point blank period to the conversation for me.
Right. And if you can't understand that, or at least be willing to listen to that argument, then you're really not engaging in good faith. And that's sort of been my issue with this conversation. So anyway, It's done. It is what it is. Notre Dame is going to have a press conference today at 3:30 to talk about it. So I'm going to, I mean, some of the responses in here.
I mean, if we wanted to just like real quick, and I mean, there's no disrespect. Yes, it is different than playing Ball State or
It is.
Miami, Ohio. Yes,
Ryan, this is the other thing that frustrates the crap out of me. New Mexico, right? Everybody puts, well, Notre Dame played New Mexico and Bowling Green. Like those teams consistently beat good. Like Georgia Tech this year played Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State was a playoff team that lost 2 games this year. That's it, 2 games. They beat Kennesaw State by like 30. Kennesaw State was a playoff team that won a playoff game. I looked at this. The 12 playoff teams. I'm trying to find the stat because I put it on the message board yesterday because that was one of the main things. Well, there's no difference in playing, Ball State and Miami and this other kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, there's a really big difference. So just give me a second to find this data because I mean, it just some of the stuff is just that the responses are just silly. If you think that people don't understand that, we don't like this because we're white, that I saw that response. That's the stupidest thing you could say about it. Like it's putting motivations on people without even hearing what they're having to say. And that's just silly and childish and won't be tolerated, to be completely honest, in this channel. So if you're not willing to have a grown-up conversation and you want to try to make petty insults of people that you don't know, you're not going to be posting here. So just keep that in mind as people are responding about different things. So I'm trying to find this. I'll just give me a second here, Ryan, because this just chat was like 8 pages long. Okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. So Bowling Green went the year that last year Notre Dame or Bowling Green went 3-9. One of their wins was a 27-10 victory over Murray State, an FCS team who went 6-5. Tennessee State went 5-6. Right in 2019, right, Bowling Green beat Morgan State 46-3. In 2018, they beat a 7-4 Eastern Kentucky team. And in 2017, they lost to South Dakota by a touchdown. South Dakota that year was a playoff team. Bowling Green, I believe, that year went 1-11. I believe. I could be wrong on that, but they were really bad. That might have been New Mexico that went 1-11 that year. So let me find this out because I want to make sure that I'm accurate. Bowling Green, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Bowling Green, the year that they lost to South Dakota, was 2-10. So I was wrong on that. They were not 1-11. They were 2-10. And they in 2016, Bowling Green, okay, who again not good. Bowling Green was 4-8 that year, beat a 9-3 North Dakota team. Okay. In New Mexico went 2-9 last year. One of their wins was over an FCS team. In 2019, they went 2-10. One of their wins was over a Sam Houston State team that was 7-5. In 2018, they beat an FCS team 62-30. In the next year, they beat an FCS team 38-14, and they pounded South Dakota, the team that beat Bowling Green, 48-21 in 2016. Right? So, I mean, these are bad, some of the worst FCS teams in the country, and they're consistently beating FCS teams with winning records. If you look at the playoff teams, every playoff team that beat that was in the FCS last year, they went 6-12 against Power 5 teams. 6-12. And if you go through and look at the teams they beat, it's not an overly impressive group of schools. Like the only good win on there, I think it was like over a 7-6 Tulsa team. The rest of them are over like 4-8 Colorado State, 1-11 UConn. I mean, here we go. The playoff teams in the FCS, their 6 wins last year were over 7-6 Tulsa, 4-8 Washington, 3-9 Colorado State, 2-10 Vanderbilt, 2-10 UNLV, 1-11 UConn. Those playoff teams also, somebody said, would Notre Dame have gotten in if they'd have played, an FCS team instead of South Florida? South Florida last year went 2-10. One of the teams they beat was an FCS playoff team. Kansas last year went 2-10. One of the teams they beat was an FCS playoff team. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's a big difference between the worst teams in the FBS and the worst teams in the best teams in FCS, with the exception of about 4 or 5 schools. North Dakota State would be a bowl team in just about every conference. Well, let me rephrase. I think they'd be a bowl team if they jumped to a bigger conference, right? I think they would be one of the best teams in the MAC now, in my opinion, because they could easily rectify not having 85 scholarships in one offseason. You know what I mean? They'd get grad transfers. They would fill that out no problem. If they made the leap next year to FBS, they would fill out their 85 no problem, and they'd have legit NFL players on their team. They would be the best team in the MAC within 2 to 3 years, if not year one, right? But that's why they win the championship every single year, because they're the exception.
Yeah,
right.
And there's only a couple of them that fit it. Like you could say maybe South Dakota State may be in a similar conversation, maybe a James Madison, pretty consistently over the last few years. But I agree with you. I mean, those are the clear exceptions. There's always, and that's why those teams always get brought up as teams that can potentially move up. Like, why don't those teams move up? Because they dominate the competition at their level. So, I mean, yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
There's definitely a clear difference between an average FCS team and the worst of the FBS. Like there just is. I mean, it's
outside of 5 or 6 teams a year.
Exactly.
It's like the worst teams in FBS would consistently beat the best teams. And it's like UConn is basically working like an FCS team. If you look at their scholarship numbers, they're an FCS team. I mean, so yeah, that's why they're losing. Same with UMass. Some teams need to go back to FCS because why do people say UConn needs to go back to FCS? Because they're not competitive at this level.
Right.
Same thing with UMass. So, that's just the reality of it, right? And as John A1 said, most HBCUs today get destroyed by the best FCS schools. True, but I think that's changing. And I think that's what moves like this are attempting to do is, Marcus Freeman having a relationship with Eddie George, Tennessee State being I believe they are the closest FCS school that plays football, correct? I can't think of anybody that's closer because Howard is further away. Morgan State's further away. And then you get down to Virginia Union. Those are D2. Virginia State's D2. Norfolk State's further away. Elizabeth City. I actually committed to Elizabeth City State in high school. That's D2. So, yeah, I think Tennessee State is the closest of the HBCUs to Notre Dame, along with the fact that there's a relationship there between the two head coaches. So it makes sense, and I think that's what this is about, right? Like you're trying to help these schools because one of the biggest problems that HBCUs have, and this is just as an institution, as institutions from everything I've been able to read over the years, is there's been this push to try to help create funding because their funding is a problem. And so this is an attempt to say, hey, look, what's the one way we can help them compete is to give them to help them with resources to then go be more competitive. So I think that's kind of part of this push, Ryan, is to make them in response to what John said, because he's right. Most of the HBCUs do get whooped up by the better FCS schools. That's why they usually get knocked out in the first or second round. The MEAC teams almost always get beat in the first or second round of the playoff, right? Like for all the greatness Eddie Robinson did, I don't think he ever won a playoff championship, right? I don't believe he ever did. There were years where he wasn't allowed to compete for it. But
I don't know if that's changed at this point, but I thought the HBCU teams, at least now, and I don't know if this is like a traditional thing. I don't think they qualify for the playoffs, right? Like they have their own. Oh, they did for a time.
For a time, they didn't. They do now. They do now. But that was part of the issue with Eddie Robinson. There was a long period of time where they couldn't make the college football, the playoffs.
Gotcha. I thought they still competed in like that Dream Bowl, which I thought was like a separate entity.
Right. They would always then they'd have that on NBC, I think, for a long time. So, but again, it's like it's just a different. It's. I think that's where a lot of this push is coming from. Is for Notre Dame anyway, is to say, look, let's get them on the schedule, and because they're going to get a big payday from. That's a big. I mean, the biggest thing for Tennessee State, there's two. The one is, hey, we're playing Notre Dame. That's going to be a selling point. I think playing a school like Notre Dame, whether you agree with it or not, is going to give you a level of validity that you don't get just by playing in Tennessee, right? Because Notre Dame is held differently, right? And so you look at it and say the other part is the financial. You can't dismiss that. FCS teams usually get big paydays to come play those FBS schools, which is why they do it. And I guarantee you they're going to get a nice paycheck to play Notre Dame. Right? I'm looking at this real quick. So in 1980, is the first time that Grambling made the college football playoffs. So it was sometime around then that changed, and they went to the semifinals that year in 1980. I'm trying to find the actual playoff link, and I cannot find it because the first year for the playoffs looks like it was 78. So it doesn't look like there was a playoff before 78. And then so Grambling made it in 1980, and then in 1985, and they lost in the first round. 1989, they lost in the first round. So he made the playoffs 3 times, and that was on the way back half of his career. I mean, he started coaching Grambling in 1946. You know what I mean? So like way back half of his career. So, and he has multiple national championships, but the point is it was always competing against. It's kind of like I won a national championship when I was at Duquesne. We won the mid-major national championship. We beat Monmouth in a bowl game. We didn't go to the postseason and beat North Dakota State, right? Like it's a different deal. And so, that's kind of where it comes from. So I think that's part of the deal is to an attempt to try to give more exposure, help resources-wise with these programs. And so I have no problem with any of that. But again, that's not my number one priority. My number one priority is Notre Dame, not Tennessee State or Jackson State or Illinois State or Indiana State or Youngstown State or anybody else. And right now, Notre Dame is a program that's trying to compete for a championship, and I don't think this helps. We'll find out. It won't hurt if they run the table. Like if they run, like somebody said, well, are you going to be mad if they run the table? No, of course I'm not going to be mad if they run the table. It's not about playing Tennessee State. Mm-hmm. It's about, are you giving yourself a chance to compete for a championship? And as you said, Ryan, I thought the best way to putting it that you said is you've made your small margin for error even smaller. That's essentially the biggest part about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the biggest thing for me. And again, I think someone's have said it a couple times. An undefeated Notre Dame team is going to make the playoff. Like it's just, 12-0 Notre Dame is going to make the playoffs. There's an absolute, it's a certainty. An 11-1 team that has one loss to, like, let's say an Ohio State or Clemson, but then only played 11 FBS teams. That makes it a lot harder on yourself. It does, because you're behind the 8 ball from a not a strength of schedule, but from a full schedule perspective to the teams that get to play in a conference championship game. You have one less game. So you are behind the 8 ball in that sense immediately. And if you don't have the strength of schedule aspect to it, then you're hurting yourself. That's just my end to it.
Now, the one thing that would change it a little bit, Ryan, is if they happen to beat USC, Ohio State, and Clemson, and those teams are all really good, and they happen to get upset by a Pitt or a Louisville, assuming it's early in the year, because we've seen that now. We've seen like Clemson lost late to Pitt one year, but they won all their big games. We've seen that with other teams where like they would get beat by somebody that wasn't good. Ohio State in 2014, that's what helped Ohio State make the playoff in 2014, was they lost early to a bad team, but they beat all the good teams on their schedule. So they had all these really good wins. So I think the only way that I think right now Notre Dame gets in as an 11-1 team is 2 things. Number one is we're talking about with a loss. Number one is you have help. There aren't any other. There's only 4 teams with 1 or fewer losses, right? The rest are 2-loss teams. That could help you. And I think that was the case in, I think it was like 2017 when Bama got in. The only other 1-loss team out there was Wisconsin that didn't get in. Everybody else was a 2-loss team. The other one would be if you beat the 3, let's assume what everybody's saying, assume that USC, USC, Ohio State, and Clemson are really, really good, like top 10 teams. If you beat all them and you just have a rough day in mid-October to some bad team, that'll still give you a chance to get in, because they're going to play Clemson in November. And no, the only problem to that is, though, it's that Ohio State and USC are both going to be earlier games. Ohio State's at the end of September, USC's mid-October. So you better hope that if you're going to lose, it's probably between that Ohio State and USC home games, is going to be where you want to maybe drop a game, because you don't want to drop a game late. But that's the only other thing. But again, we're going to have to kind of look around at a lot of different things and be like, okay, they're going to need help, more help, I think, than normal. And that's really what this argument comes down to. So, and then Coleman Smith said, Brian, what are your thoughts on adding the 13th game? Again, Hawaii is so bad that I don't know if adding Hawaii on top of Tennessee State really does anything. You know what I mean? Like, and it would be another road game. So, if they want to add it to get a 13th game, I have no problem with that. But they can't just – this thing y'all have to understand, they can't just add a 13th random game. Like, they just can't say, hey, we're going to play so-and-so the week of the college football, the NCAA or the conference championship weeks. They can't just call BYU and say, hey, BYU, let's play, the week of the conference championship games. There's rules against that. You're only allowed to play 12 regular season games. The only exceptions is if you're willing as a non-conference team to go play at Hawaii. That's the thing. And the reason I say you'd have to get another road game is you don't get a benefit from having Hawaii come to you. The rule was put in place to try to coerce teams to go play at Hawaii. So like Oregon State, and who was the other Power 5 that played Hawaii last year? UCLA. Wasn't it UCLA? UCLA and Hawaii both beat Hawaii last year. They didn't get a 13th game because they were both at home. They didn't play Hawaii at Hawaii. The rule only applies to get that 13th game if you play at Hawaii. And you can only do it like once every, I think it's like every 4 or 5 years. You can't like do it every year. So that's why the rule is in place. So Notre Dame would have to petition the NCAA for a 13th game, and it would have to be against an independent, right? Because you're also not going to schedule a team that may have a conference championship game that's going to be worth a darn. So you'd have to schedule an independent and hope that independent is good. That would have to be it. So we do got a super chat from Charlie Moore. Love to Brian and Ryan from Switzerland. Appreciate that very, very much, Charlie. So Ryan, anything else to add to this before we dive into our Q&A? So this is going to be a mailbag. So I know a lot of the conversation so far in the chat has been about the topics we've discussed. So we're either going to wrap up now, or y'all need to start firing away with some questions here real quick. But Ryan, do you have anything else that you want to add kind of about this topic?
No, I mean, again, I just think margin for error is the biggest conversation piece for me. Like, that's just where it is. It's not about what school was added. It's about it's an FCS program. Like, that's just all it comes down to. And I think that the margin for error is something that Notre Dame fans need to be very aware of. And, that's why, even last year when you're struggling against a Toledo team, like, that makes you worried at the end of the season, because you're like, that's not a good, indicator that you were a dominant team against a lower level part of your strength of schedule. So I think that is something that we need to be aware of until Notre Dame is able to schedule a 13th game, or is, does become a part of a conference, which I don't think should ever happen. Like, until that happens, you need to be very wary of the negatives that would be associated with scheduling not high caliber opponents.
So I'll ask you this. We've had this conversation here, Ryan, a lot. My opinion is well known. You just said what you believe. Why do you? Because I agree with you. I don't want Notre Dame to ever join a conference unless they have no choice.
Yeah.
Why are you against Notre Dame joining a conference?
I mean, it's a national brand. I mean, one of my biggest things is the fact that, like, I think that students come to Notre Dame from everywhere, and they come because the biggest selling point is that you play a national schedule. You get to go to USC. You might stay in the Midwest. You might go down to a Miami or a Clemson or whatever it might be. Like, that's one of the biggest selling points to me and obviously from a financial perspective, like, Notre Dame obviously has their reasons in that department as well. But for me, it's always just been, it's a national brand. It's a national sell. Would like them to continue to schedule to play a national schedule, because I think that there are some tough parts about recruiting to a degree, but it's easy to sell the fact that, like, hey, you come here, you're going to play everywhere. You are going to get, obviously that treatment of playing the best of the best. Like, that's always just been kind of, for me, my preference for the scheduling aspect of Notre Dame.
Now, there's another overreaction to this that's an error too. This is from Tyler Bedwell. 2023 playoff is likely out of the picture. Even if they run the table, they will have one less FBS win than everyone else in the running. Look, If Notre Dame goes undefeated next year or any other year, they're going to be in the college football playoff. Okay, so let's not go too far with this conversation. If Notre Dame goes 12-0 with a win over Tennessee State, also with wins over Ohio State, Clemson, and USC, they're going to be in the playoff. The only way that Notre Dame would ever not make the college football playoff as an undefeated team is if A, their schedule is garbage and there's 4 other Power 5 teams that won conferences that are undefeated. That's the only way they're ever not going to make it. So let's not overreact too much in the other direction either, Tyler. And I understand, again, you're in the same spirit of what we're saying, but that's taking it way too far. Notre Dame, with the schedules that they have coming up the next 7-8 years, unless these teams just fall off, an undefeated Notre Dame is in the playoff. I mean, as bad as their schedule was this year, if they would have gone undefeated, they'd have had a win over one ranked opponent. That is it, one ranked opponent, and they are for sure in the playoff. They almost made the playoff this year with 0 wins over ranked opponents, and they had a loss. So they're going to get in if they're undefeated. That's not going to be the case at all. Ryan, do you like the AC? And this, again, I've talked about this, so I don't need to share my opinion. Everybody knows my opinion. Do you like the partnership with the ACC then, at least? Yes and no? Am I kind of reading you a little bit?
I'm in between on it. Like, I understand why it is a thing with obviously the allegiance in other sports. So I get it to a degree. I just wish the ACC was just a more consistent conference. I just feel like there's, at some years you just have Clemson. I mean, honestly, because Miami's been inconsistent. North Carolina had one pretty solid season, and they've just been up and down, obviously. So the consistency of the conferences is what kind of I get stuck on. But I do like it in a vacuum. It's just I wish maybe that the marriage would be to maybe a little bit of a stronger conference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like the partnership with the ACC. I do. I don't have a problem with it. Again, and the ACC's down now, but there's going to be years in 6 or 7 years. I'm like, man, this ACC juggernaut is, what I mean, with Miami and Florida State. I mean,
I'm hoping for it.
College football is cyclical, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that, again, the last time Notre Dame won a championship, if the ACC was what it is now, 2 of the 5 best teams in the country every year were ACC teams. And they played each other every year. It's Florida State and Miami. So it's going to be cyclical. I don't think the ACC has ever been or ever will be. At least I haven't seen it like the SEC. Just because there aren't enough conference, teams in that conference that care enough about football to, invest the money to be great at it. But I think the ACC will get better and will be a strong conference again. Because I think. I don't know if we're ever going to, in any time in the near future, going to see Miami and Florida State like they were. I don't know if we'll see that, but Clemson and one of them could be that way. You know what I mean? And that's where I think we could see it. And, you hope that Mac Brown can get North Carolina better and NC State. And to me, it's not necessarily about having great teams, Ryan. The thing that hurts the ACC right now is there just aren't any good teams, really. I mean, beyond 1 or 2 a year. I mean, like the one year Clemson beat Pitt in the ACC title game, that Pitt team finished the year 7-7. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's embarrassing, but it's if either Clemson, Miami, or Florida State is elite, but then you need to have like 5 or 6, like just really good teams, like good top 20 teams, 25 teams. That'll be good enough. You just can't have it be a league where literally you've got like 1 or 2 ranked teams in it. And that's even sometimes questionable. Like the ACC this year was, it was bad. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like Wake Forest was one of the surprise teams, right? And I just kept pushing back all year. I'm like, I don't think Wake Forest is very good. It's just that the ACC is not good at all this year, And when you have a Clemson that's been a power over the last few years and they're down and the rest of the conference hasn't been very good, then that's when you kind of run into the, oh, well, yeah. I mean, you were aligned a little bit with the ACC, but it wasn't a very good conference. So like that also hurts the strength of schedule conversation to Notre Dame as well. So that's just my biggest push is I hope that the AC gets to a point, because I want Miami to be very good under Cristobal. I want them to be a good team. I want there to be strength in that conference. I want Florida State to get back at some point with Mike Norvell, hopefully.
To at least be like a 9-3 team every year. And
Exactly.
you know what I mean? You need that. Because let's discuss that real quick, right? Because what I think people need to understand, and there's a really good comment by Alex B about playing an FCS team for Notre Dame that I want to get to, that I thought is I never thought about, but I think he made a great point. But it's not just good for Notre Dame because they play those teams, right? But it's also good because if Miami is really good under Mario Cristobal, and if Florida State's really good, like a 10-2 team every year, they're not going to necessarily take away from Notre Dame as much as they're going to take away from Bama, from LSU, from Clemson, from Florida, right? Like that's partly why that's part of the reason Bama has had the success it's had. It has been the decline of Miami, Florida State, and Florida. It's not a coincidence that Alabama's ascension and the level of dominance they've had recruiting came at the same time as Miami and more so Miami and Florida, but then to a degree, Florida State after 2013 went down, right? Because that 2013 Florida State team could have played with Alabama, right? I mean, they beat Auburn, who beat Alabama that year, right? I mean, so those teams going down, all of a sudden, the recruits they used to get, Bama's now going and getting all, like they're just getting all those guys. And so people say, I want parity in college football. I want more good. I hate the word parity. I want more good teams. That's what I want. I don't want parity. I want more good. I don't want it the NFL where it's like kind of bringing everybody else down. I want to lift other teams up. And Miami and Florida State becoming forces on the recruiting trail again helps Notre Dame because they're going to take more kids from Bama and Clemson than they are going to take from Notre Dame. That's what I think about it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, Notre Dame's going to pull a couple kids out of Florida every year. They're going to pull a couple kids from down in the SEC territory, but you're right. That is Alabama country, and it has been dominated. I mean, why has Alabama been so good? Yes, they have a great coach. There's no doubt, but also you win in college football by recruiting. Let's just call it what it is, man. Like it's that old, it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and the Joes. And I think it's especially in college football, like you need players. So I agree. And I really actually did like the Mario Cristobal hire. Not that I think Mario Cristobal is a great coach. I think he's a good coach.
Good coach.
But he is a very good recruiter. And I think that's going to be the difference.
And he's put a decent staff together too. That's another important thing. Like it's not a great staff, but it's a good staff. Like I don't love Josh Gaddis as an offensive coordinator, but he's not terrible. I mean, he just was part of a Michigan team that made the playoff. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily because he was a great coordinator, but he'll recruit well, and he's a good coach. Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank now on who they hired as their defensive coordinator.
Oh, that just went back to Baltimore, right?
Did he leave?
He was the linebacker coach at Baltimore, went to Michigan, and I think they just hired him as the defensive coordinator in Baltimore now. The Michigan.
Gotcha. I thought no. I meant Miami.
Oh, Miami.
They hired Kevin Steele, right? Now, here's why that's a good hire. I think Kevin Steele is a very mediocre defensive coordinator. But you know what Kevin Steele has got a reputation for? He's a great recruiter.
Sure.
And at Miami, you don't necessarily, let's be honest, if Miami's recruiting like Miami's supposed to recruit, they don't need a great defensive coordinator because he's going to have phenomenal talent to work with, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. So he's not a bad defensive coordinator. He's just okay. Really good recruiter. And that's where he's kind of made his bones over the years. So, I mean, look, he recruited the players that Brent Venables eventually inherited and turned into a really good defense. They gave up 70 to West Virginia because he's not a very good defensive coordinator, but he can certainly recruit. So let him recruit for 3-4 years as you build yourself back up. And when you're ready to go compete for championship, go find a real defensive coordinator.
Brian Van Gorder. Yeah,
no, I said a real defensive coordinator. So this is a point that Alex B made. I want to bring this up. He said he agreed with what we're saying. He says, I don't like the timing of it. I'd rather them wait until 2025, the last year of the 14 playoff, to play an FCS school. Now that's an interesting one. Now I actually would go further and say not the last year of the 14 playoff, but I would say I have way less of an issue with this type of thing if it was in a year where it was a 12-team playoff. Because if Notre Dame's 11-1, and I don't care if they played the worst FCS team in America and beat them by 100, they're a playoff team at 11-1. The 12-team playoff, Notre Dame's getting in at 11-1. I don't care who they played.
I mean,
they would have got in this year as a 5 seed, and they beat 0 ranked opponents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other thing. What do you think about that, Ryan? If they were going to do something like this, occasionally do something like this, where there's a game where there's some meaning behind it, right? Maybe a former player is at an FCS school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say Mo Crum takes over an FCS program, right? He's the now D coordinator. He was at Western Kentucky. I'm not sure where he's at now. But let's say Mo Crum is the head coach and you want to kind of schedule a game with a former player to kind of help him build up his program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if it's in a year where it's he's the new D coordinator at Ole Miss, I don't have as much of a problem with that. I still don't like the idea of playing an FCS, but my whole notion of it impacting your ability to play for a championship is gone. Because if we accept the premise of what the 12-team playoff will be, I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like, but because they're all the renegotiations. But when the proposal was embraced initially, it was Notre Dame can never be a top 4 seed. An 11-1 Notre Dame team with a win over an FCS school is still a 5 seed. A 12-0 Notre Dame team that doesn't play an FCS school and beats everybody by 100 is still a 5 seed. So it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
What would your thoughts be on a game like this at that point in time?
I mean that completely changes the narrative for me, right? Like my main argument was that you're lessening the margin of error, but in this scenario that you're talking about, the expansion of the playoffs, Alex, right? The margin for error just got a lot bigger. So even if you're lessening that, it's still bigger than it was before.
Right.
So I have no
Notre Dame could be a 2-loss team and have a shot at the playoff in a 12-team playoff. That's just the reality of it. So again, because at this point in time, the whole FCS thing is gone. After this, there's no point in being pissed about future FCS opponents because like that whole you've never played an FCS team is gone. So whatever. If it's not impacting your championship opportunities, then I don't care. As long as there's meaning behind it. Like I don't want them to play Indiana State. And this is no disrespect to Indiana State. I mean, Chris O'Leary, I believe, played at Indiana State. It's no disrespect to them, but there's no value in it. There's no value in playing Eastern Illinois. There's no value in Youngstown State. The value comes from, there's got to be some meaning behind it. We're not propping up, but like we're helping out a former player who's the head coach or AD at a school. We're trying to have this moment with an HBCU, whatever the case may be. There's got to be more to it than just scheduling an easy game. As long as there's something like that, after the college football playoff expands, and it will expand, I don't care. I mean, because the whole championship thing, Ryan, is gone. So that's Alex. That's a really interesting, very interesting way of looking at that. I never really thought about that. Like, because right now my whole world, Ryan, is the 14 playoff. I haven't even really thought about what it's going to be like after that.
I mean, honestly, like I don't really think about the expansion too much because it's just so far into the future. So, Alex, I appreciate the insight because that's something that is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to think about in the future.
Because I think the whole idea of not playing an FCS is something that I embraced and cherish and appreciate, but it's also not something I'm gonna get too pissed about. It pisses me off for 5 minutes, and then it's like, okay, as long as they can still go play for championship, whatever. I mean that my whole thing is it comes down to the idea of, does this help or hurt Notre Dame's ability to go play for a championship? And that really, at the end of the day, is the only thing that matters. Truly matters to me. Like, I'll get over the whole they've never played an FCS thing, whatever. Because it's not going to be that long to where there is no team left in there. I mean, it's what USC and UCLA, and I think USC is about to play an FCS team here coming up. So it's about to be just UCLA, and at that point in time, nobody cares because it's UCLA. The other thing too is pointing to the basketball team playing Howard is really apples to oranges. It has no bearing because they're both Division I teams. Like basketball is different. You're playing a Division I team. It's not gonna.
And because Howard had a 5-star kid sign there 1 year, right? I mean, you're playing,
recently.
You're playing 5-on-5, so getting one high-ranked recruit completely changes the dynamic comparative. If it's like a Jackson State signing the corner wide receiver, the number 1 recruit. What was his name?
Travis Hunter.
So they signed Travis Hunter. great player, right? Great recruit. I'm sure he'll be an outstanding player for Jackson State. I'm sure he'll still be a future first round selection, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But does he move the needle where they now are the best team in the FCS?
Mm-hmm.
Not really, not really.
Right.
But one guy on Howard potentially, or another school like that, if they get a high 4, a 5-star type of basketball player, then that completely changes a little bit because it's a 5-on-5 situation, very comparative.
There's also some situations too when you look at the Howard game and you look at their coaching staff. Kenneth Blakeney was a Duke guy, right? So there's that Mike Bray connection. Rod Balanis, who'd been a longtime Mike Bray assistant, is now an assistant coach at Howard. So again, in that situation, there's benefit to both sides. We benefit because we're getting a game and we're getting some publicity because we're playing, because they played. The cool thing about that was they actually played. It wasn't like Howard coming to Notre Dame. They actually went out there and played them, which is interesting, which is not something Notre Dame will. I mean, you don't ever see FBS teams going and playing at FCS schools. Just financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So there was a lot of reasons why that Delaware game happened, and but it's just a different scenario because it's all Division I. In basketball, it's all Division I. So let's get down to see. Do we have any questions here, Ryan? So let's get up to this one. We'll get to a recruiting question here from Jordan Schreiber, and this will be for you, Ryan. Any elite running backs in 2024 that Notre Dame has a shot at, a la Singletary Hayden? Why do the Irish keep compiling great running backs instead of going hard for elite running backs?
I mean, so of the running backs that I have watched so far in 2024, I think the best kid that I've seen is probably Stacey Gage out of IMG Academy. Mm-hmm. He's a kid that, I mean, he's already like 5'11", 210 pounds as a sophomore at IMG Academy. So, I mean, he's certainly a very good player. As far as where they are, I mean, the running back board, in my opinion, as far as 2024, it's very early. Like, you can't really gauge too much as far as like where they are with certain players in that sense, unless it's a guy, we've talked about Peter Jones, obviously the offensive tackle out of Malvern that Notre Dame has put themselves in a very good situation with early. We talked a lot about Emmett Mosley, who's a double legacy player. Mm-hmm. His dad played at the University of Notre Dame, and his mom was also a very good soccer player, a record-setting soccer player for Notre Dame as well. And then Peyton Woodyard, obviously the safety out of St. John Bosco out there in Cali, is a player that has a connection being Kyle Hamilton's cousin. So I think there's some players that are obviously a little more on the forefront as far as, their interest in Notre Dame. Julian Sands one. I think the running backs right now, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of good players on the board. I don't know if I would say any of them are in, Notre Dame's in amazing position right now, but I would say the best kid that I've seen so far is Stacey Gage out of IMG Academy. There's Anthony Carey out of Florida, who I think is a really talented player. Brian Jackson's a really interesting player out of McKinney. Brian, I don't know if you've seen him, but he's a thick running back. And I remember when Brian Smith actually interviewed Peyton Bowen at one of the events, he actually asked Peyton, who was the hardest player to tackle that you went against? And mm-hmm. I think he had mentioned a little bit like, Cade Klubenek was a really good player. He's like, no, but like the hardest player to tackle was this running back out of McKinney. And Brian was kind of like, oh, who's, I don't know, is he a 2023 kid? He's like, nah, I think he's a 2024 kid. So he was a sophomore at that point, Brian Jackson out of McKinney, Texas. So a couple of very talented players, but it's just a little bit early to kind of perceive if Notre Dame is a favorite for any in that type of sense.
The last part, why does Notre Dame keep compiling great running backs instead of going hard for elite running backs? Look, you mentioned Stacey Gage. Notre Dame made a hard run at Stacey Gage. He had almost no interest in Notre Dame. Right? I mean, you can't recruit guys that aren't interested in you, number one. Number two, I don't think that's the one position I don't care about guys being elite in high school. I don't. I think that's a position where a lot of these elite running backs in high school, a lot of them don't pan out in college, or maybe a higher number than people think, because part of the reason they're so good in high school is they're just so much bigger than everybody else. Right? Mm-hmm. Like Trent Richardson was that way. Trent Richardson was a successful back in high school because he was just bigger and faster than everybody else he played. He was good at Alabama, although I always thought he was overrated because he ran behind phenomenal lines. I never thought he was a guy that had very good vision. I never thought he was a guy that had like a very good feel for the game. He just was big and fast. Then he goes to the NFL and he's awful because of that right there. Because in the NFL, everybody's big and fast. And now it's about, do you have the IQ to play the game at a high level, the football IQ, and he didn't, you know. And then you look at a guy like Jonathan Taylor, and he does have that. So his success translates to the next level. And so, you know, you've seen a lot of these big time backs that just don't really pan out. And then you see all the time backs like Kyron Williams go out and put up all American caliber seasons. If the line is good, you don't need a 5-star running back. Give me if Notre Dame can every year promise me that the running back depth chart will be as good as the one they have now, you will never hear me say the running back is the reason they don't win a championship. Never hear me say it. Ever hear me say it. It's just not necessary, in my opinion. And so I don't really care about going hard after elite backs if they're not interested. Give me the best backs you can get. And look, you say going after elite backs, they went hard after Nicholas Singleton. They just lost. They just didn't get him. It wasn't about going hard. They just couldn't land him. And so I just think it's a situation where, I don't know why running backs don't have more interest in Notre Dame, especially with the way that Harry Hiestand recruits. But for whatever reason, they just don't. But I don't care. Running back recruiting the last couple of years and moving forward is the least of my concerns. You know, it's like you give me that Corey Smith kid that they offered from Wisconsin running behind the offensive line, Harry Hiestand and Chris Watt are going to put in the field, and I don't give a rip if he's ranked as a 1-star recruit. That, you know what I mean? That kid's going to put up monster numbers.
I forgot about that kid. I remember we were messaging back and forth, me, you, and Sean, when we saw the film. I'm like, whoa.
That was it. So Sean publishes his film and just is like, wow. And Ryan's like, his response was, this was Ryan's deep, thorough analysis that I pay him for. Wow. So I had to come correct as the owner of the site and the long-term scout. And I came back with like, holy crap, was my detailed response or something like that. It's like sometimes evaluation isn't needed. You're just like, wow. Like, you know, so go get me that kid. And I don't care what he's ranked by the people. You put that kid behind the offensive lines, their name's going to be put on the field. Running back is not going to be your problem. No. It'd be nice to, that's not to say don't recruit elite players. If an elite player is interested in your program and you think you have a shot to land him, if you put the full court press on him, put the full court press on him.
Yeah.
It's just, I care more about fit and upside and potential and all those type of things than I do about and the other thing too, is you get a 5-star running back and let's say your offense needs to be a little bit more balanced and you need to throw the ball a little bit more, then you got to deal with him coming into your office mad that he's not getting enough touches. Right. And, you know, that's one of the other issues with that kind of, yeah.
I also think regionally speaking, right, usually the great running backs are coming from southern states, right? Like they're the Florida kids or the Texas kids. So, I mean, regionally, there's just, it's going to be tough for getting a kid, maybe a great 5-star running back out of Florida to leave an SEC program.
Because there aren't a lot of them. That's the other thing is like there's not like 20 5-star running backs every year. You know, there just isn't. And I'm actually going to go look at this now, Ryan, and look at running back recruiting. And right now on the 247 composite ranking for the 2023 class, there's 2. The number 3 running back in the class. Matter of fact, if you go look at the 247 composite rankings, there's only 4 running backs that rank in the top 100.
That's crazy.
Right. Which backs up what you and I have been saying for a while is this is just not a great running back class. If you look at last year, 2022, it's better. There was, let me go to running backs here real quick because Walter Nolan was not a running back. There was only 1 5-star running back last year, and I thought last year was a good running back year. And there was a total of 8 top 100 backs. There's only 8 top 100 running backs last year in what was a good running back class. 2021, if you go look at the running backs in 2021, there was 3 5-stars, but only a total of 7 total top 100 guys. Right. And you talk about making a run. Notre Dame made a run at one of those 5-star running backs, Will Shipley. He's the number 2 running back in that class. Notre Dame made a very hard run at him. Notre Dame made a very hard running back at the number 4 running back in that class, Donovan Edwards. I thought Notre Dame should have made a better run at Trayvon Henderson. What a lot of people don't know is Trayvon Henderson was a 4.0 student who liked Notre Dame. Notre Dame just made the choice not to go after him because they wanted Will Shipley. That's the recruiting mistake that I think they made. I had no problem with them going hard after Will Shipley. I don't think they should have gone after him and not had other options, because Clemson was always considered like a tough school to beat for him, even when Notre Dame seemed to be the leader. But I never understood why they didn't go harder after Travion Henderson, because as much as I love Will Shipley, Ryan, and I'm very high on Will Shipley as a college running back. Mm-hmm. Travion Henderson was clearly a better player, in my opinion. Clearly a better high school player.
I watched their the all-22 of their game against Purdue. Oh my, Travion Henderson's good. Oh my, Brian, he hit one gap where, I mean, in most people, these guys had an angle on him from both sides of him. And I'm like, okay, he's going to get touched. He didn't get touched for like a 50. I'm like, whoa, man, that's a little bit of a different gear right there. That's a little bit different. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. So anyway, Jordan, to your question, Notre Dame has gone after talented backs. They have gone after some elite backs, but at the same time, you also have to be smart as a coaching staff and not waste your time on guys that you just flat out know you're not going to get. That's not the same as saying, well, we can't get a 5-star player. We can't get this guy, so you don't even try. It's you put forth effort, and then after a while, you realize we're just pounding our head against the wall. This kid is not – he doesn't call us back. He doesn't really show – I mean, that's different than the kid likes us, but we got to put in the effort. That's a little bit of a different story. 2020, same story, around only 3 5-star running backs. There was, let's see here, there was 10 top 100 running backs that year, and Notre Dame got one of them, Chris Tyree.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, again, I don't think running back recruiting has been an issue. That's just my 2 cents. Here's one for you, Ryan. Since you have a front page story today about Julian Sand, who's a 2024 quarterback from Carlsbad, California. Mm-hmm. And he says, how much does, if Dante Moore commits Notre Dame, how much does that affect Julian Sand's recruitment? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, somebody asked me also this in the message board. I don't think it does, to be honest. I mean, most kids, I think it would. But just talking to Julian several times now, I don't think he's afraid of competition at all. Mm-hmm. I really don't. I think that he's comfortable with what he is. And I think that he just everything that he's kind of talked to me, his biggest thing is that he wants to be in a great place and he wants to be around great people. He has a great relationship with Tommy Rees. Every time I talk to him, he just praises Tommy Rees. So I don't think that if Dante Moore commits to Notre Dame, I don't think it's going to be a big repercussion on whether they can land Julian Sand or not.
Because the 3 schools he mentioned to you were Notre Dame, Georgia, and Texas.
Right.
Those schools are all going to get big-time quarterbacks every year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Texas has just got Ewers. They're in the hunt for Arch Manning. Georgia was in the hunt for Arch Manning. I don't know where they stand now. I haven't completely followed that recruitment as much as maybe some others. But look, this is the thing that people have to understand. If you're going to go to a program like a Bama, a Notre Dame, hopefully a Georgia, a Texas now with Sarkisian there as a quarterback, Ohio State, yeah, you know that they're going to recruit a really good player in front of you and they're going to recruit a really good player after you. You know that. So if you don't want to compete with great players, then kids aren't going to look at those programs. They're going to go to UCLA. They're going to go to Texas Tech. They're going to go to Oklahoma State. They're just not going to go to those programs. They're going to go to Michigan. I'm sorry. I'm kidding. I couldn't help myself. So that's the thing is, Ryan, like you said, is he's not going to look at those programs because he knows even if Notre Dame didn't get Dante Moore, he knows for a fact that Notre Dame's going to go try and recruit a 5-star like, Bryce Underwood in 2025, right? So what I'm curious about more, Ryan, is if Notre Dame lands Dante Moore, how does that impact their view of Julian Sand? That's the more interesting one for me. Like, do they just say, you know what, if he wants to come, we'll take him? Or because I don't believe he's the number 1 quarterback on their board. I think CJ Carr is. And I know they like Jaden Davis a lot. And so, I don't know if CJ Carr is the number 1, but like he's in that group of guys that is like, this group of A players. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Julian's the top guy on that board. And so if quarterback's one of those positions where you will prioritize the board a little bit usually. Now, sometimes there's just like these guys are all stars. So we'll take whichever one wants to come. But in this instance, I'm curious how that's going to be. Because if you get Dante Moore, then you can just say, look, if Julian Sand wants to come, he's a pretty good football player. Let's take him. Let's not
Yeah.
overthink this. You know what I mean?
Well,
So,
if they really like CJ Carr, especially if like that is their top guy, and I think they probably have it seems like they have a couple guys up top that they really like overall. If CJ Carr is your top guy, getting a 5-star from the previous cycle from the same state, that's kind of a weird dynamic, isn't it? Like I don't know if that would be a deterrence from the interest in Notre Dame with CJ personally. I'm not sure about that, but I just, again, I don't think that it's going to affect Julian's perspective on the situation. And I think Notre Dame would be maybe comfortable with that situation because I think Julian saying gives you a great baseline. We can talk a lot about, like, is he a little overhyped as far as his recruiting ranking, but certainly a good player. Certainly.
yeah. Let's get to some more questions here. Here's one that you starred, so I'll let you answer this one from Jeff Fluke. Is a hot dog a sandwich? So answer the question, Ryan, then define what is a sandwich.
A sandwich is I'm gonna define the sandwich first, then I'll give my answer. A sandwich, because I think it will kind of answer the question. A sandwich is 2 pieces of bread that have something in the middle that they sandwich together. So in that sense, yes, I believe hot dog is a sandwich, actually, by definition.
I never really put a lot of thought into it, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I mean, sandwich, right? Like that's, you know, I mean, it makes sense, right? And I like that you said it doesn't have, it's not, you said it's something that is between because it doesn't have to be meat. Some people will say something with meat in between, but
doesn't have to be meat.
A BLT is a sandwich, right? Exactly. Peanut butter and jelly is a sandwich. So yes, I agree. I think a hot dog is a sandwich. I didn't even realize that was a thing.
That's a big debate. It's a big
Seriously?
Debate. That's the hard-hitting news that we need to talk about in this country.
What's the opposite? What's the argument against it being a sandwich?
I guess that it's not one. It's only one piece of bread technically, and I don't know. I take it.
Well, every sandwich is on something that was once one piece of bread.
I agree. And
then that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like a roll, it's not baked as a bottom and a top. It's not created as a bottom and a top. It's created as one bun, and they cut it in half. So if I just tear the top, the hot dog thing in half, how's that any different? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. People actually make that argument.
Yeah. Oh no, they do. And my rebuttal would be the same that you just said. So if a hot dog bun is split in half, then is it a sandwich?
Right. So like Ryan, one of my little weird obsessions that I love baking bread. I make a lot of bread at my house, right? We had some fun with that. You know, Sean had to get me back when I was making fun of his mojitos. He had to get me back with the fact that I bake bread at home. But I cut it up and make sandwiches out of it, but it always starts as one piece of bread. Right? Like that's the dumbest thing. I can't believe people actually argue against it. Like, I mean, you could make arguments like, okay, the shape and, you know, how you eat it, I guess could be things that I think you could maybe somewhat say that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but the fact that it's one piece of bread compared to 2, that's a bad argument.
I mean, I just can't think of any other reason that it would be a big pushback, right? Because I mean, if you took a hot dog and then you put it on 2 pieces of regular white bread, is that a different dynamic?
Right. So like you mean like how hot dogs were when I was growing up? Yeah,
right.
As a kid, I had more hot dogs on bread than I had on hot dog buns, especially at grandma's house. You know, she'd always buy hot dogs and then realize, oh, I don't have hot dog buns. Or, you know, which is the dumbest thing ever. Hot dog buns come in a different size than packages of hot dogs, which I've never understood that. So you'd always get to that point in time where you had more meat than you had bread and whatever.
I love this. I love this chat right now. It's so fantastic.
Is there people? Are there?
Is cereal a soup?
What?
Someone asks, is cereal a soup?
No. What? Okay. Does something have to be hot or cooked? I should say cooked, because it doesn't have to be hot, but does something have to be cooked to be a soup?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to some football before we go too far off the rails. Zachary Lane, are we hoping LSU loses every game this year? I don't say I'm hoping, but I wouldn't be upset about it.
The answer is yes. Zachary.
The answer is yes. I'm not that spiteful, but I wouldn't say I'm against it. I just wouldn't say I'm rooting for it. I guess partly I'm not rooting for it because it's not going to happen. They're not going to lose every game. They play an FCS school, so they'll win at least one. Sorry.
Could you imagine if they go 1-11? The only win is against an FCS team. That'd be
That
funny.
would actually be kind of phenomenal. I would love that, actually, now that you say that. I'm actually going to look up what LSU's schedule is this year. I know that they play Florida State in the opener, which is going to be really fascinating. Mike Norvell could get his career jump-started in a game if he can pull off that W. They play Florida State, then they play Southern, then Mississippi State. So there's one win, Southern. They play New Mexico at home. That's another win. At Auburn, home against Tennessee, at Florida, home against Ole Miss, home against Alabama, at Arkansas, home against UAB. I'm not chalking that up as a definite win. If they're that bad where they're losing most of those games, UAB is good enough to beat them at that point in time. Now, UAB has turned into a really quality, overlooked program. Didn't they win 10 games last year? I think they did.
I think so, yeah.
They went 9-4 last year. Beat BYU in a bowl game, lost to Texas San Antonio by 3, lost to Rice by 6. They lost to Rice, lost to Liberty in Georgia, went 9-4. The year before, they went 6-3. The year before that, in 2019, they went 9-5. They've turned into a really quality 11-3 in 2018. They've turned into a really quality program.
Mm-hmm.
They really have.
They have a freak that's coming out in the draft this year, Alex Wright. He might be a top 100 kid at defensive end. He's like 6'6", 270 with vines for arms. So they got some dudes.
I dig it. Bailey Brad, why does Notre Dame play so many ACC teams? So Bailey Brad, the reason for that is Notre Dame has a relationship with the ACC. They signed a contract. I believe they signed it in 2013. I believe is when they signed it, but I could be wrong on that. But essentially, Notre Dame plays a minimum of, I believe, 4 ACC teams a year, and usually it's 5. And it's part of Notre Dame joining the ACC for other sports. So Notre Dame is in the ACC for every sport that basically the ACC has teams. So like they're not in it for hockey because there is no ACC hockey, I don't believe. They're in it for women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball, softball, soccer. I mean, just about every sport that the ACC has teams except for football. Well, part of the deal to get them to go to the ACC for all those other sports is Notre Dame also signed an agreement with them to basically make it to where they play a minimum number of football games. And it's a rotating schedule. And I think it goes to like 2035, I think is what it is. Actually, I'm gonna pull something. My wife and I were looking at this the other day. I have to find it. I can't remember where I put it, but we were looking at this, and it's like till like 2035 is when this goes to. So that is why Notre Dame plays so many ACC teams, because they have a partnership, a relationship with the ACC. Michael Gardner said, Ryan, by that time Tennessee State might even be the best team in Tennessee. Look, Tennessee was the necessary butt of jokes and understandable butt of jokes for a while. Their record last year may not impress you. They went 7-6, but down the stretch, Tennessee was playing good football on offense, and Josh Heupel is recruiting well, and the boosters at Tennessee are throwing some money around. They're gonna be a better program. There's no question about it. They just got a 5-star quarterback who I've said I'm not super high on, but Josh Heupel took that team, Ryan, from 21.5 points per game in 2020. This was his first year at Tennessee, correct?
I believe so, yeah.
They scored 21.5 points per game in 2020, and they averaged, 346 yards per game of offense. They averaged 365 in 2019. They only scored 24 points a game in 2019. Last year, with Hendon Hooker at quarterback, right, who couldn't keep the starting job of Virginia Tech, and at the beginning of the year, with Joe Milton, who is terrible.
Awful. But
he really got the most out of Hendon Hooker. And they scored 39.3 points per game last year. They went from 21 points per game to 339 points per game. They went from 346 yards per game to 474 yards per game. They went from 5.3 yards per play to 6.5 yards per play in 1 year.
It's a nice jump.
1 year. And not great talent. In the second half of the year, I mean, their receiving core was incredibly depleted down the stretch. I mean, they had some guys getting hurt early in the year that were really good football players for them. And, that's kind of part of it too, Ryan, is so the time of Tennessee being the laughing stock, which they were for a while, and it was glorious, is going to come to, not even slowly, is going to quickly come to an end, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I don't think Tennessee was nearly as bad as people act like they were. They have some guys, even defensively, in this year's draft that, I mean, Alante Taylor was a really good cornerback there. Defensive tackle Matthew Butler. They have some dudes. They had actually, no, I think Crouch transferred the linebacker that's at Michigan State now, but they have some players. And like you said, Hendon Hooker was a talented but very inconsistent player at Virginia Tech, obviously. And part of that was due to the coaching staff at Virginia Tech. Like, let's just call it what it is to a degree. But he went to Tennessee and he looked like a completely different football player, like absolutely completely different. And I mean, we've talked about Nico and where we kind of see him more realistically, but I mean, I think that he's going to fall into a pretty good situation with the new coach, that he can obviously coach football and he can obviously,
Right.
Nico, he can develop quarterbacks.
The thing with Hendon Hooker and Justin Fuente was weird, because I always thought when Hendon played, he was their better quarterback. Like for 2 years in a row, when he played, that's when Virginia Tech was at its best. But for whatever reason, Fuente would not play him, and if he had another option, it was bizarre. It's one of the many reasons Justin Fuente sucked and got fired. But
that offense was atrocious, man.
Yeah.
I hate scouting that offense. It is awful because it's just, for whatever reason, they also had a decent wide receiver too, Brian, in Trey Turner, which, like, for whatever reason, and they had a decent tight end too, even though he got hurt early in the season, and James Mitchell, for whatever reason, they're just like, we're not going to open up this offense at all. We are going to be this ground and pound, we're going to play ball control. And I'm just like, I think you have some athletes, man. Like, I don't think that you have nothing at wide receiver. I don't think you have nothing at tight end. And for whatever reason, and the year before, I got it more because you had Khalil Herbert, who had a great season, and Khalil Herbert was a really good running back. I got it more. But this year, I mean, I guess it's because they have Braxton Burmeister, who was just more of an athlete playing quarterback and maybe a little bit limiting. But for whatever reason, I just always thought that Virginia Tech was just, for some reason, was afraid to open up that offense. And I don't know why it is, but that was just, I mean, they were rotating. I mean, Quincy Patterson was a guy that they played more over Hendon Hooker at a point there. Quincy Patterson went to North Dakota State and he got benched at North Dakota State.
Right.
Like, just not. Yeah, it was a very weird dynamic under Fuente. Very weird.
It was so obvious. It was so obvious that he was their best quarterback. Or I don't say their best quarterback. More importantly, he was the when he was in the game, their offense just moved better. And it was like night and day. It was still an ugly offense schematically, but he would make it work to a degree. And he just would never play him. So I don't know what it was. It was bizarre. It was really, really bizarre.
It's good for Hendon Hooker though, because I'll say this, Brian, he flirted with coming out this year, even though he had the extra year. I guarantee next year Hendon Hooker's going to go a lot earlier in the draft than people anticipate. Just putting that out.
Talking about next year?
Yeah, next year's class.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, he put up with a lot of crap there. And then he goes to Tennessee and doesn't start early at Tennessee. They started Joe Milton early in the year.
I know.
And he's awful.
Man. What was that? Was that the first game of the season or the second game where Joe Milton was just airmailing every deep ball? They were wide open. It was just awful.
It was so bad. I think it was the Pitt game. Or no, it was the Bowling Green game.
I forget, man.
It might have been the Pitt game.
Guys were running because there was some talent at wide receiver. They have the one kid that's coming back.
Velus
Jones is in the draft, and he's a good player.
Right.
I mean, they had some guys running wide open, and Joe Milton was just airmailing everything. I'm just like, what is happening?
They had another receiver this year that Notre Dame really tried to get. Did he get hurt? No, was he a guy from last year? I'm trying to. Where is he at? Did he play DB? Tennessee receiving? Maybe he played DB. I thought he was a receiver. Where is he at? Alante Taylor. I guess he played DB. I know Notre Dame was trying to get him to play, I believe, to play a receiver. Yeah. But yeah, Cedric Tillman had a 1,000-yard year. Javante Payton's a good player. I mean, averaged 23 yards per catch. Their tight ends were serviceable, combined for over 30 catches. But the point is like, yeah, they had some good receivers, but they didn't have great receivers. And Hendon was still able to go out there. He threw 31 touchdowns and 3 picks last year.
Crazy.
I mean, he threw for almost 3,000 yards and I don't think took over. He kind of replaced Joe Milton during the Pitt game. That was the game he took over. And he had some really, really good moments. The Purdue game was one of the more entertaining bowl games of the year. Like, that was a really entertaining bowl game. And it was a lot of fun. Alberto, nothing to say. Love catching you live. Thank you for that, Alberto. Garen Knutson, just because. Thank you so much for that, my man. We're obviously doing. He's still excited because of what he had on the grill yesterday. So he had the day off. So he's loving it, loving life. We're obviously doing something great for others to seek us out for the purpose of mischief. People throw rocks at things that shine. Hashtag tease. I didn't know that was Taylor Swift. All right, Jason Krapek, can we talk about changing schedules that we don't play in Cali at the end of the year? Come in November, you Cali cowards. Ha ha. Come here in November. First of all, I would absolutely love to see USC be the last game of the year every year.
That'd be awesome.
I would much rather see that. And like, I love the rivalry with USC, but I'm almost at the point now where if Lincoln Riley's not the answer, then I'm going to tell USC we need to reschedule this. And this is either going to be the last game of the year every year, or it's going to be the middle of the season every year. Pick one. Because I don't see the value in ending it, because the way that recruiting works now, like, it used to be, it made a lot of sense, because so much of recruiting, even when Brian Kelly first got hired at Notre Dame, the first half of his tenure, Ryan, the biggest push in recruiting was still the close in February. That's would make or break your recruiting class. And a lot of the California kids were still open, so you go right on the road recruiting. It made a lot of sense. That's done. That's not a thing anymore, really. I mean, your class is pretty much done, and there's no reason you can't get on a plane and fly to California after playing in Georgia or at home. You know what I mean? So I don't think there's the value to that anymore. I don't think playing USC on the road in mid-October takes away any of the shine of that game if it's a big game. So I'm going to tell USC, pick one. We're either playing every week in the middle of October, or every year in the middle of October, or playing every game at the end of the year. We're not going to let you get the benefits of this all the time, because the benefit we had of playing late in the year is gone. So this doesn't do a thing for us anymore. And if USC balks, if Lincoln Riley can't get USC turned around and USC is still bad, I'm at the point now where I would consider, if USC is not willing to work with Notre Dame, to say, okay. And I know a lot of people won't like that. A lot of people won't like that. But I'm just kind of tired of USC, to be honest with you, as far as the schedule aspect of it. Jason also says, Freeman seems intent on running the heck out of the ball. What kind of balance do you see our offense having, run versus pass? I think they're going to be very balanced. I think people are making way more out of what Marcus Freeman said in his press conference about running the football than needs to be there. Notre Dame is going to seek to be a very good running team, but Notre Dame is also going to seek to be a very efficient and explosive pass team. If you knew what Notre Dame has, my opinion, the best tight end in the country, if not the best, he's one of the top 2 or 3, right? And the coaching staff of Notre Dame loves Lorenzo Styles, and they like what Braden Lindsey can bring to the table, and obviously the backs can bring value. This is not going to look like the 2017 offense. It's not. It's not going to look like the 2012 offense. They're going to throw the ball more than both of those offenses. So I don't think the notion that they're just going to run the ball and Tyler Buckner's going to go throw 15, 17 times a game, that's not what this team's going to be about, unless he's going 14 of 17 for like 285 yards, right? Because they're just hitting bombs. I mean, I think this is going to be a lot more balanced than what people think. They're not going to go from what they were at the end of last year, Ryan, to looking like the 2017 offense again. And that's what I keep hearing people talk about. Like, oh, they're going to run the heck out of the ball because of what Marcus Freeman said on April 2nd. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's more about trying to establish an attitude. But once you get into the fall and it's about building around your entire arsenal, I understand why they're focusing on running the ball now. They don't have any receivers or tight ends on the roster right now. But once they get the whole arsenal, Ryan, you're going to see a balanced offense in the fall. Yes, they're going to be a really good running team. That's their goal. But that doesn't mean you can't throw the ball. And I think that's the mistake I think a lot of people make.
Yeah, no, I think balance is something that you need to strive for. I mean, because there's going to be games where it's not going to be working as well. There's going to be games where you're struggling a little bit. I mean, against Georgia last year, it was hard for anybody to run the football. So you have to have those instances where, you can kind of lean on the other parts of your game. So, and I think especially, excuse me, with Tyler Buckner coming in, especially, you want to see a lot of growth in the passing offense this year, because if Tyler Buckner can show that balance as a run pass threat, I think that just opens up everything offensively. There's so many more possibilities in that sense.
All right, let's get to some more questions. Matt S. Has Notre Dame offered 2024 receiver from Illinois, Cam Williams? Don't believe so, right?
No, so he's visiting this weekend, I should say.
Wasn't he also on campus this past weekend too?
Oh, I'm mixing him up. Yes, I'm sorry. He was on campus this past weekend. He does not have a offer to date. He left the weekend. He did not get the offer, but they are keeping close eyes on him. And he's a highly recruited kid, and he's a kid that is well regarded. I think he's a top 150, recruit on a couple different services. So they're certainly keeping their eyes on Cam Williams for sure.
Charlie Moore says, no more hot dog talk. Time is precious. I'm with you, Charlie. I appreciate that very much. Matthew Jackson says, is there going to be a special show for April 9th, or are y'all going to wait for intel before doing a show regarding Braylon James? So Braylon James is no longer making a public commitment on April 9th. That has been moved back. 24/7 was interested in moving it back. Braylon also was interested in moving it back. For some personal reasons that I don't think he wants out there right now, but it has nothing to do with his choice. Nothing. It had nothing to do with him having second thoughts. It's literally just a scheduling decision, is it? Okay, so whenever that decision is made, and it's going to be, I believe it was reported it'll be the 19th or the 20th. Whenever that is, we will carry that show live, and we will talk immediately afterwards about his decision and what it means for Notre Dame, one way or the other, and that's all we're going to say. But we have all the intel we need. And if you were on the if you're on the Irish Breakdown message board, we haven't said where he's going, but I think it's Tommy Guns, what is the one position group that's outplayed expectations so far, and what's one that's underwhelmed so far this spring? Right, Tommy, this is a very fair question, but it's not one that I think we can answer. Yeah. We've had Notre Dame's, I think, gone through 9 practices now. There's been one open practice where we could see the whole practice, and then only 2 other practices where we could see like individual and PAT field goal and some light team stuff. It's because, look, anyone that's been a part of a practice, Ryan, whether it's high school, Division III, Division I AA, FBS, you're going to go through a 15-period stretch where the best parts of your team are going to have crap days. And if that happens the day that the media is there, it's like, oh, my gosh, this part of the position group is going to stink this year because we saw them that one day when they were bad. That's not indicative necessarily. It could be, but it's not indicative of what we've seen every other day, right? And so it'd be really unfair for us to tell you that based on the little that any of us have seen. And I would encourage anyone covering the team to not make sweeping conclusions about what they've seen. Now, we will make conclusions, well, not conclusions, but like, for example, we had an intel piece at Irish Breakdown last night about the team. There's one particular part of the team that's doing really well and has been all spring. And that's the offensive line. I'm not going to tease you all like that, but if you'd have been on the board, you'd have read that last night. We had some quarterback intel. We had some intel on some D linemen, linebacker, Brandon Joseph that's there, but the offensive line's really, really playing well. And as good as Blake Fisher has been, our intel thing talked about the fact that he hasn't been their best offensive lineman in some people's opinion, which says a lot. So, but that's based on what other people are reporting. Now, we've seen that in practice, so I think I don't know, but I wouldn't call that outplaying expectations. I think, Ryan, that's kind of what we expected to happen. But yeah. I think it'd be unfair for us to say anything beyond here's what we're hearing. Yeah. And that's why in the intel piece last night, it was very clear. This is what we're being told. This isn't our opinion, right? Because we haven't seen enough.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you what I saw in that one practice I was at, but I'm not going to make an overarching, talk about what the entire group has done during the spring, because that was one practice out of, like you said, 9 so far. So that was a small fraction of what we've seen. But don't worry, Tommy, we'll have more in-depth opinion hopefully in the future. At least we'll have some intel as far as people a little closer to the situation as far as how things have shaken out.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kendrick Heath, do you guys like Notre Dame's schedule the way it was prior to the ACC deal or the way it is with the ACC deal? I would say my answer would be neither. I think they have not had a happy medium in recent years. I think that the schedule was a little bit too poorly constructed before the ACC deal, meaning it was silly to have like 4 Big Ten games in the first 5 weeks of the season. That was silly. That was, it's not that, again, I don't have a problem with playing 5, 6 really good football teams. I have a problem with you starting your season with 4 of them. That's where you're not giving your team the best chance to kind of get going, because those teams aren't playing those. They're going to have lead up games to their game with you, So I would like the schedules to be tougher than what they've been in recent years, but part of that's been because things that you can't control. I mean, if you'd have gone back and looked 6, 7 years ago at Notre Dame's 2021 football schedule, you'd have had a different of opinion of what that was going to look like. In the challenge that you're like, you guys are opening on the road at Florida State. Do you guys like not want to compete are you just trying to end your season in the opener? Right? Like that's what people would have said, right? I mean, you just said, man, you're playing at Florida State, you're playing Wisconsin, you're playing at Virginia Tech and at Stanford, and then you got to play USC at home. 10 years ago, this would have been look like a juggernaut schedule. Like you guys have no chance of going 9-3 that year, right? Stanford was a top 5 team. You look at Virginia Tech was a really good team. USC was a really good team. Florida State was, 9 years ago was a national champion, right? And one of the more dominant teams we've seen in decades. So, it's cyclical, right? And I don't think that's Notre Dame's fault entirely. But I do think that I would like to see more of a mix of maybe some better opponents, in my opinion, which we're starting to see, right? And I think moving forward, we're starting to get more of that mix. You're still going to have USC and Stanford. You're going to have the ACC schedule, but you got Texas A&M coming on the schedule. You got Bama coming on the schedule. Florida's going to come on the schedule. So I think that's going to get more into the sweet spot. But between these two, Ryan, which one do you prefer?
Right now, it's before the alignment with the ACC, but I like I said before, my whole pushback against it is the fact that the ACC has just been an inconsistent conference since that alignment has kind of happened. If they became a more consistent conference, I'd be completely okay with it. But me right now, I would say before, but that opinion can change depending on how the conference evolves over the next few years.
Dave Grouse says, would a partnership with the Big East make sense since they have a lot of Catholic teams and we would get a lot of exposure to their fan bases, especially since they don't have D1 football? The last part of what you just said is exactly why the being in the Big East would have very little value to Notre Dame, because it's about money. I mean, you're not going to get nearly the payout from being in the Big East that you are going to get from being in the ACC as far as the other sports. And number two, I don't think Notre Dame needs exposure in the areas where the current Big East teams are. And I think the Catholic aspect of it is interesting, and I think there's some value there, but it's not like a needle moving type of thing. I think being in the ACC for other sports is clearly more impactful for Notre Dame in other sports than it is for than being in the Big East, because the Northeast is not an area where Notre Dame necessarily needs a lot of help or exposure. You're already a pretty popular program there. The ACC gives you exposure in the Mid-Atlantic in areas where maybe you aren't necessarily. Because it's kind of counterintuitive. The fact that there are a lot of Catholic schools and Catholic leagues and it's a much more prominent Catholic area means there's already people already know who you are and you already have that exposure. That's not necessarily true. Anyone that's lived in the South knows there aren't nearly as many Catholic schools and Catholics in the Mid-Atlantic as there is in the Northeast. And so I think it's getting exposure in places that aren't overly normally exposed to you is more advantageous than more exposure in areas that you already get a lot of exposure. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, there's no big real selling point to the football aspect of it, right? And football is the moneymaker. So at the end of the day, if it doesn't make sense for the football side of things, it doesn't really make sense in my opinion. So if it were comparing Big East alliance with an ACC alliance, it's ACC by a landslide, right? Like you need that power part of the football conversation for it to be a good sell for the whole program. It has to be productive and it has to be rewarding to each side of the coin. It can't just be the other sports, but it doesn't help the Notre Dame football team. It has to help everyone, in my opinion.
All right. Let's see here. Chase Talks Sports. Is there any chance that Notre Dame can go toe-to-toe with the Big Ten in recruiting in Ohio. Ohio normally has some good recruits every year. They are now. I mean, they can, and they are. They have one of the best players in Ohio is currently committed to Notre Dame, and that's Brennan Vernon.
Sure.
They're trying to dip back in for an offensive lineman that is Ohio State wants. That's Austin Saraveld. So yeah, I mean Notre Dame should be able to have more success in Ohio. They've had it in the past when they've tried to be there. Harry Heastain had a lot of success in the state of Ohio. Beat Ohio State for Tommy Kramer and Jimmy Byrne, and of course Liam Eichenberg. They got Kyle Rudolph out of the state of Ohio, Sean Crawford. So Notre Dame has had success there. They just kind of took themselves out for a while, to be honest with you. And now they're starting to go back in there because you don't have Marcus Freeman as your head coach and now Washington coaching your D line if you're not going to get back in the state of Ohio, Ryan. It's just silly.
Yeah, so. I mean, I think the whole question was toe to toe. Yes, the answer is yes. They can go toe to toe because they are going toe to toe, dominating. Obviously, you're never going to dominate Ohio, but yeah, you should be able to go into Ohio and compete with Ohio State, and I think that they are. So yeah.
All right, Matthew Jackson, number 1 of 2, with Texas and OU going to the SEC in a couple years. Do you all see the NCAA potentially dissolving the Big 12 into the other Power 5 conferences? I think if Notre Dame is going to join a conference, it should be after that takes place if it happens. Number 1, I don't think the NCAA has the power to dissolve the Big 12. The Big 12 either chooses to dissolve or it doesn't. I don't think the NCAA can step in that regards. And I look, I think the Big 12 is going to have a fight for survival, much like the Southwest Conference had, but it just depends on the moves that they make and the growth that the conference has between now and then. I mean, I thought the move that they made, in my opinions, Ryan, I'm trying to think. They added Cincinnati, right? They added BYU, which I thought was a good move. They added Houston, which I thought was really smart, and they added UCF. Look, Orlando is one of the biggest areas in the country, and UCF is one of the bigger public schools in the country. I think those were smart moves. Again, is this going to work? Is it going to save the conference? I don't know, but I feel like at least these are moves that are going to help your conference, in my opinion, because I don't think that league is necessarily weaker than the ACC. I mean, look, the Big 12 has as many teams with Cincinnati in it, has as many teams to make the college football playoff as Clemson has had, right? Wouldn't it be 2? No. So Oklahoma is the only Big 12 team so far to make it. TCU should have made it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think that those two teams leaving necessarily kills the Big 12. It's going to make it harder, but part of the success is going to have to be, Oklahoma State, Baylor, those teams have got to figure some things out and start winning, because winning is going to attract more money. I mean, that's just a reality of it. But it's going to be harder, but I think the moves they made, Ryan, at least gave them the best chance. And I don't think Notre Dame needs to be reactive. If Notre Dame's going to join a conference, I believe Notre Dame needs to make that decision to be proactive, not reactive. Don't wait for things to happen. Say, hey, look, we're going to do this. And I've always said I would love for Notre Dame to start their own conference. Like, just get as many teams as you can, like that really makes sense, and say, hey, we're going to go start the new Big East or something like that, right? We're going to get Penn State. We're going to get Virginia Tech. We're going to get BC and Pitt and Syracuse, whatever. Do something like that as opposed to waiting for all the dust to settle and being like, okay, now let's see what works best. I always feel like Notre Dame should be a trendsetter, not a reactionary. That's just my 2 cents on that, Ryan. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, it's a mess, the whole college football realignment thing, to be honest. I mean, the funny thing is, when you were talking about UCF, I was just thinking, yeah, they have a former national champion UCF that's coming to the conference. That's pretty big time, right? No joke there, no laugh. Okay, you're not listening to me.
Sorry, I was reading another question. What did you say, Ryan? I'm sorry, man.
I said it was big for the Big 12 to get former national champion UCF to come to the conference.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, you know what? I mean, it's more national champions than a lot of those other teams have.
It's true.
But, look, they added some schools from big cities, right? And that's a key. And they added a good football program in Cincinnati. And Cincinnati's been a good football program for a while. This isn't like some flash in the pan team, right? They've been a good program for a while. I don't know, we'll see how it works. But trying to see here. West Virginia is in the Big 12, correct?
Yes. Yep.
I'm trying to see here because in the West Virginia and TCU. Okay, I was like, they're listing all the teams in this release. I'm like, why didn't they talk about West Virginia? Like, okay, they joined in 2011. Okay, sorry about that, Ryan. I was trying to get to as many questions as possible down here to see if there was any. Here's one. Wayne Miller said this, and again, now that this is happening, this is something I'm actually for in the future. Once they get to expanded playoff, I'm all for this. I like the idea of playing FCS schools once every few years to help former players and coaches. It can be the birth of a new tradition. I'm for that. If that game is meant to not just help you out, but then hey, there's a purpose behind it, I'm going to be more sympathetic now that sort of that cherry's been popped, so to speak, Ryan. Like, okay, it's going to happen again, but don't make it all the time, and it better mean something. And you better wait till after they've expanded the playoff before you do it again.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think that if it's going to be a consistent thing, and not every year, but if it's going to happen from time to time, if there's two beneficiaries to it, I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's get down here. Bobby Halfacre, would an alliance with the Big Ten be any better as far as a schedule ranking?
Yeah.
I like the way he asked the question. I
Yeah.
think it probably would be.
Yeah, I think so.
Because Bobby I like that he said, would it be better for Notre Dame to be in the Big Ten? No, but he's very specific. Would it be better as far as a schedule ranking? I think if you're playing 5 Big Ten teams a year, you're probably going to be playing better teams as a whole than you would. I mean, look, last year's a perfect example, Ryan. The 2 of the 3 best teams Notre Dame played last year were Big Ten teams. And they weren't even that good, but they were still 2 of the 3 best teams you played. You know, with Cincinnati being the other. So, yeah, I would say for now, yes, that would be true.
From a scheduling, yeah. I mean, I just
scheduling ranking, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So for that part of the question, Bobby, I agree. I think that the one thing that, like, I think if you were in the Big Ten full time, though, I don't think that helps recruiting at all, right? Because, like, you already should do well in that area. I think kind of selling different areas of the country would be a big point of emphasis as far as the teams you're playing. So I think that would actually hurt the recruiting dynamic a little bit, which I would not be in favor for.
Yeah. If your only concern is playing a tougher schedule now, it helps.
It makes sense. Sure.
But that's that. It has to be way more than that. All right. Mad Dog says delaying the time of the game doesn't aid Notre Dame. This is in reference to us saying like waiting till the thing expands. Delaying the time of the game doesn't aid Notre Dame being a socially aware team by playing in HBCU. 3 years down the road, the social impact wouldn't be the same. Right, Mad Dog, we understand that. I don't care. Like at the end of the day, I don't care about a football game being socially aware if it doesn't help you win a championship. And that's the whole point, right? So I feel like your response is sort of this, you guys don't really understand what this game is about. Yes, we do. I just don't care. Right? I see the value, but I don't care enough about that to trump the idea that you've potentially made your chances of playing for a championship harder. I understand it, right? But it's not the most important thing to me. Playing for championships is the most important thing for me. And as long as this doesn't get in your way, I'll be fine with it. Because again, we do understand why it's being done. But it just, and I don't even dislike why it's being done. I dislike what it means in regards to how it improves Notre Dame's championship. So please don't assume that because we don't agree with it or we have a difference of opinion that we don't know why it's being done. We do. And he also asked, with the addition of the Harvard DT, what does the scholarship count at for 2022? Notre Dame's still under 85. So if they need to add another grad transfer. Kenneth James says, judging by the grad transfer DT, the injury to Aiden Canaana must have been more impactful than first thought. No, he was pretty much going to be out for much of the year. A knee injury for a big guy is usually a 8 to 9 month thing, Ryan.
Yeah.
He got hurt in March. 8 months takes him into November. It's a little different for a skill player, right? And it was a torn ACL. And that's a minimum 6 months for a skill player. And I think it might even be longer than that, depending on the severity of it. But 8 to 9 months is really the sweet spot, I believe, still for that. Correct, Ryan? For an actual tear, not a partial tear, but an actual torn ACL.
Tear. Yeah.
And for a 300-pounder, it's always gonna be on the back end more often than not if it's a full tear.
Right. You don't want to rush bigger guys
No.
back from those injuries. Like you need to be cautious, and you need to let time kind of heal those types of situations. Because, like you said, I mean, the tension of just more weight on that type of injury is a substantial thing, and it's a real thing. So yeah, I would not want to rush Aiden back, because I mean, the worst possibility is that you bring him back too quick and then he re-tears it, or he has another injury because he is overcompensating for the tear that he had. Like, you just ease him back slowly. Don't rush that one.
Yep, agree. And that's why this makes a lot of sense. Real quick, the world famous Scotty Nitro says update on the baby IB family. Mama and baby still growing. Indy and IB family prayers are working. Just a reminder, or if those weren't here, Scotty and his wife are having, I believe this is their first. Didn't he say this is their first child? And she's just not growing the way that they want her to, and there's some concerns about that, but still growing. So that's a great thing, buddy. And we will continue to keep you and your family in our prayers, no question. John A1, here's a good question. John always comes correct with the questions. How good can the 2022 interior offensive line be? Which player not named Patterson needs to step up to the most to dominate top 25 defensive lines? Let's go reverse order on this one, because I think the second question impacts the first one, Ryan.
Sure.
So let's answer the second question first, and then that'll lead us to the second. So why don't you go ahead and take a shot at that one?
Well, I mean, I think both need to step up, though, both guard positions, because I think that I don't think we've seen the best of Andrew Kristofic yet. Like, I just don't think we have. I think that there's a lot more there. And then we need to see Josh Lugg get back to like the player that maybe they thought he could be. Even, I mean, he might never be the athlete that he was pre-injury, but we need him to be just a consistent player. But I guess to the question of who needs to step up the most, I guess I would go with Andrew Kristofic, because I think that Josh Lugg is going to be at least a solid player inside, or he might get passed up in that conversation. But I still am a big believer that I think Andrew Kristofic's ceiling is still pretty high. I think he could be a very good interior player. So I guess for them to take that next step, I guess I would go with Andrew Kristofic, just because I think that his upside is maybe one of the highest on the interior.
I think it's Josh Lugg, because I think if Andrew Kristofic makes just normal year one starter to year two progress starter, he's going to be a good player. I think Josh Lugg, to me, needs to make the biggest jump. I think because Josh has been so inconsistent and he is changing a position. I also think that Josh Lugg is still, if he's the player I think he can still be, to me, needs to really be that guy. Because the point is, I think Andrew's going to be fine, right? I'm more concerned about right guard. So I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I'm taking a different angle on it. I think center's going to be fine. I think left guard's going to be fine. My concern is Josh going to be healthy at right guard? It's the biggest thing. And is he going to play to his potential? If he does, along with if Andrew Kristofic is the player you think he's going to be, and Jarrett Patterson's the player you think he needs to be, then for this to be a dominant interior offensive line, they need Josh Lugg to raise his game. That's why I'm answering it the way that I'm answering, because I don't disagree with you, but that's even more reason why Josh Lugg has to really step up. Because if that happens, I think this interior is going to be really, really good. How good could it be? I think it'd be one of the 10 best interior lines in the country. That's what I think. Will it be as good as the tackles? I don't think so. But that's because I think the tackles can be one of the 3 or 4 best tackle tandems in the country this year. And forget when they're juniors and seniors. I'm talking about 2022, especially with the intel that we put out last night, which was really kind of exciting. So that's kind of, for me, Ryan, why I'm kind of confident that this line is going to be good. But if the guards step up then and play well, this line is going to be really good, because that's the thing I think is missed about the 2017 line. Yes, they had a great left side, but they were just great period up the middle. I mean, Alex Bars was really good in 2017. Sam Mustipher was good in 2017. And as a trio, they were really good in 2017. I think 17 was still Sam's best year. I don't think he was as good in 2018 as he was in 2017. Just individually wasn't as good. But even then, as a tandem boy, they were dominant. And when you can dominate right up the middle, you're a hard offense to stop. I mean, a really hard offense to stop. All right, I think we got one more question we're going to get to here, and then we're going to get out of here because Ryan, I know you got to get going. Zachary Lane says, which home game is Irish Breakdown doing a pregame get together this year? So, Zachary, I think we're planning on doing something for every game for the most. That's the plan right now. We won't necessarily do a full spread and all that for every game, but we're at least going to kind of do a get together for every game. That's what people have asked for. Like, hey, we don't care if you have to have food at every time. We just want to get together and not just meet us, but more so people just want to meet each other and have a place where they can all go to meet and talk. And so I was like, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we won't necessarily have a big tailgate for each one, but we will do something as a get together before every home game next year. So that will definitely be the case. So Ryan, do you see any other questions here about that we want to get to here before we get rolling? I don't see anything. There's talking about pancakes and some LSU losers that have jumped into the conversation here, and always fun for those times.
I love the food talk. We never did answer if cereal was a soup.
It's not a soup. I think soup if you cook it, maybe I can call it a soup, but no, it's not a soup.
I think I saw someone say is pancake bread at some point. I think someone asked that. I thought I saw that.
I mean, it's made from the same thing that bread is made from, so, I mean, I would probably lean towards yes. Do you have an answer for that, Ryan, or are you just going to sit that one out?
I've never thought about that one. I need some.
It's funny some things that people are talking about because, I've never really thought about that. And I said a BLT was a sandwich. The B stands for bacon, so that obviously has a meat in it, so that made no sense. Yeah, I mean, okay, if you take two pieces if you take two, I mean, is a McGriddle, is that a sandwich?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, it's basically pancake, right? So
I guess. I think we need a new podcast on the channel that should just be Brian's food takes. I think
it's funny because I watch a lot of the cooking shows on YouTube, to get like recipe ideas. Like my wife's like, I want to try this. So I'll just, because like I can read instructions, but I'd rather see someone like, okay, what's your technique for doing this or that, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I watch a lot of that stuff. I said to my wife, I was like, you should start because my wife, Ryan, she doesn't like to cook. And she doesn't like to bake, but she's a phenomenal baker. Like I've been begging her because our anniversary is this week. I said, look, it doesn't have to be on our anniversary because I know you got to work and you got a lot going on. But sometime this week of anniversary week, I would love for you to make, like when we're first married, she would make. So our wedding cake was like normal cake. And then it was like, I forget what one, like amaretto was one of the flavors. And then another one was cherry chip. And so what she would make is for our first few anniversaries, she made cherry chip cupcakes with amaretto frosting and roasted almonds on them.
Sounds good.
Dude, they were phenomenal. And then she would make German chocolate cupcakes for my birthday because I love German chocolate cake.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal. And I was like, you should start a channel where you bake stuff. Because she'll just she MacGyver stuff, man. She's like always Jimmy rigging stuff around the house. And she'll just take recipes and then just mess with it and do her own thing. And it's always better than the original one. So I've told her she needs to start a cooking channel.
I love the combination desserts, by the way. Like that's one of my favorite cake that I've ever had was a carrot cake cheesecake.
Okay.
It was incredible. I don't know if you like carrot cake, but I love carrot
cake. I have a hard time eating carrot cake now because my freshman year at college, the cafeteria was so bad that all I ate every day for lunch and dinner was carrot cake and bologna sandwiches. Like it was so bad. Like you'd put I'm like, oh, hey, look, they're serving baked ziti. So then you put the thing into the pan and then you lift it up and the whole pan comes up. Like that's the kind of food that we would, you know what I mean? Because like it's just one big blob. So gross. It was so bad. I didn't want to go back my second semester, but I did before I transferred. But it was so bad, man. I just bologna sandwich and carrot cake. So I ate so much carrot cake that year that I'm like the point now where it's like I'm good.
I love carrot cake.
I'm good on carrot cake. Hey, Mission Barbecue's sweet of the month of her sweet, seasonal sweet right now is carrot cake. So we have some upstairs. Nice. Charlie Moore with super chat. Charlie, thank you very, very much. And then we had somebody that said something about why are LSU fans so bored today? I have no idea. It's a great question. Thank you for that super chat too, Charlie. But yeah, I'm definitely going to try to convince her to make that. She's got all the ingredients for the cherry chip But it's like, Ryan, you'll understand, man. Like, she like cherry chip cupcake, amaretto frosting, and then she actually will cut the almonds and roast them and then put them on top.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So good. I need to get back on her about trying to start the trying to get back to that cooking channel. That'd be more fun. Be more reward for me than her current. Well, actually, her current job built the message board, so I should probably shut up about that, about it being more beneficial to me. So, all right. Any other questions here? I don't see. Tommy said something about a Doc Holliday and Johnny Ringo question. I didn't see that, and I'm probably glad that I didn't see that, because I don't know where that one was going to go. But anyway, everybody, have a great day today. We have definitely gone off the rail, but that's what mailbags are all about, guys. If you want to talk about something a little different, we'll talk about something a little different. And, it is what it is. But yeah, the chat was very interesting today. So hope everybody enjoyed themselves. Come to the message board. We can continue talking about this. We can continue talking about, whether or not cereal is a soup or not. If you want to, on the message board. I don't know why you would really care enough. But as Mace AK says, join the message board, everybody. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the podcast, and as always, go Irish. So everybody, thank you so much for being with us today. Ryan, thank you for joining me today. We won't have Vince back until Friday. He is coming back from a little family vacation, so he'll be back at it on Friday. So you'll kind of have the whole crew back together. Regarding potential film room tonight, that's up in the air. Just depends on, like, this is the way that we kind of do it. It's not just anniversary day, it's kind of anniversary week. So, my wife might have some things planned for tonight. I have to find that out. She's been working all day today, so I haven't had a chance to talk to her yet. We'll know, but hey, that's why you need to be subscribed and hit the notification bell, Ryan, because then you'll know. Right. So you'll see the notification going out that we are or are not doing a film room tonight. One thing I can say is when we do the film room, we're going to be talking about Notre Dame offensive line prospects. So out of that, I can tell you. So if you like the big boys, that's what our next show is going to be, whenever that is going to be. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining the Irish Breakdown podcast. And we will talk to you very, very soon.